IB Nation, welcome back to another episode of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. Happy Tuesday. Hope everybody had a fun and safe Memorial Day weekend. Hopefully, everybody got to see some family, eat some good cookout food. But we are back, Bryan, to talk some more Notre Dame football. And today we're going to be looking at it from more of a big picture lens. All of the big name magazines are starting to crank out their preseason previews of this upcoming 2025 football season. Athlon Sports just released there. Hint, hint, Brian Driscoll has a little piece on Notre Dame in there, so everybody make sure to go check that out. But today, we have a lot to cover. So we're going to start off today's show by talking about the college football playoff rule change. And we've talked about it briefly in other segments of different shows, but today we're going to begin with breaking down what those changes are, what it means for Notre Dame. Some of the maybe more specific conferences in the southeastern area aren't as happy about it as some others are. And then we're going to dive into some coaching rankings. Now, obviously, Notre Dame's head coach, Marcus Freeman, has generated a lot of publicity this offseason. He's gaining a lot of traction. He's one of the hottest up-and-coming coaches in college football. So we're going to spend the second segment of today's show talking about where he falls in some rankings between Sporting News, ESPN, CBS Sports. And then we're going to wrap it all up today talking about the Athlon Sports college football season preview for 2025. We're going to talk about Notre Dame, talk about their top 25 rankings. They ranked like position units going into this season. They have breakout players. They listed their preseason All-American team. So there is a lot to dive into today. It's felt like a long time since we were back in here on Friday doing the free-for-all mailbag, so I'm happy to be back, Bryan. So happy Tuesday to you. I'm ready to dive into it, man.
Yeah, and I hope that everybody had a wonderful Memorial Day. Obviously, the cookout reunion barbecue is part of it, but also remembering what Memorial Day is, which is a day that we remember those who actually gave their lives in battle to defend our freedom so that we can be sitting here as two men who did not serve, enjoying the freedoms that come from the sacrifice that those men and women have made for our country over the last, over their family die in battle. And, we greatly appreciate that. And yesterday was an interesting day, Trev, for me, because obviously, my grandmother and my grandpa are no longer with us. That's usually what our reunion is about. But, got to go to see the grave site where my grandma and grandpa are buried, and you have all my grandpa's Army awards. And I'm one of those people that was fortunate enough that my grandfather came home from the war. Yours did as well. And a lot aren't that fortunate, whether it be their husbands, their brothers, their sons, their grandfathers, whoever it may be. So we honor them and we thank them. And I hope that everybody was able to remember while having fun yesterday, because I do think it's good to celebrate in a world of the freedoms that they fought and sacrificed for. But also to remember what they sacrificed for, so that you and I can sit here and talk Notre Dame football in a free country, in a defended country. So a lot to talk about today, Trev. We were just going to do the Athlon Sports stuff. And just so people understand, I did write the Notre Dame section of the Athlon Sports preview. I had no bearing on the top 25. I had no input on breakout players, unit rankings, All-America list. We'll talk about all the Notre Dame players that were part of those conversations and units that were part of that. I had no impact in that. All I was asked to do was provide a 400-word breakdown of the team and give the two deep. That's it. So I would love it if you'd buy Athlon Sports. It's kind of a cool thing for me because, Trev, I grew up watching these magazines or reading these magazines, and it was always a highlight of my summer was when they would come out, and I'd go by all of them, and I'd get to read about it and vent about, what they wrote about Notre Dame or who wrote it or whatever. And now I'm just like, the dude who wrote the Notre Dame stuff is wicked smart. That guy's spot on with his analysis, but I don't know about the rest of these teams. I'm just kidding, but it is pretty cool to see it in there and know that I played a small role in that. But you guys can always buy that. They're coming out in the stands this week. Also, you can order online and you can get specific covers. There's two with Notre Dame on it, I believe. You can get those as well. So you can definitely check that out. But the Athlon Sports College Football Preview. But we were just going to talk about that. But Last couple of days, there's been a lot of talk about the college football playoff for reformatting and the SEC stuff, and all these coaching rankings came out. So, like, you know what, man, we're going to talk about all this stuff. But we're going to kick things off, Trev, today by talking about some of the reactions to the college football playoff changes for 2025, but then also some of the debate that came out, a lot of it yesterday from the SEC people, because they're at their meetings and they're talking about, you know, the proposals that they're going to submit for the 2026 playoff and beyond. The Big Ten has already said that they want a 4-4-2-2-1 format, 4 Big Ten automatic qualifiers, 4 SEC automatic qualifiers, 2 each from the ACC, Big 12, 1 group of 5, and then 3 at-large teams. The Big 12, the SEC has not basically made a recommendation yet, but there's a lot of annoying comments coming out of the SEC yesterday that we want to address that's very frustrating and just factually inaccurate and just kind of silly. So we're going to talk a lot about that and dive into those things today. And then, of course, we'll talk about the Freeman stuff. But I got to admit, Trev, I want to start off the Notre Dame angle of this. It has been absolutely hilarious watching all the whining coming from people about Notre Dame in the college football playoff, not now in 2020, for 1 year, possibly getting a bye. Possibly. We don't know that Notre Dame's going to get a bye. But the fact that Notre Dame can possibly get a bye, I saw one national analyst who I rather like, but I thought his take was really poor, and talking about how, you know, Notre Dame pushed for this. And I'm like, what exactly did Notre Dame push for? Like, the way you're spending it is like, you know, you're basically kind of hinting that they were going to have a rule that only punished Notre Dame. Like, it's been really kind of lame. And what's funny is the vast majority of Notre Dame fans that I know, definitely analysts like us, totally supported Notre Dame not getting a bye last year. They didn't deserve a bye because they didn't play in the conference championship. And when the byes are given only to conference champions, then a team that doesn't play in a conference doesn't have a right to get a bye. Well, once you get rid of that as being the requirements, then now what you're advocating for is that there should be a rule that only punishes Notre Dame. And this pushback or this dismissal of, well, there's no way that an SEC or Big Ten team that gets left out of the SEC or Big Ten title game is going to be the top 4. Yeah, there is. We saw that in 2017. And I don't want to hear any crap about, well, that was divisional football. Okay. End of the year, number 2 Auburn plays number 6 Georgia in the SEC title game. Number 5 Bama's left out, right? So the answer I got back when I brought that up was, well, in the current format, number 5 Bama would have played number 2 Auburn. Okay, in a rematch. All right, fine. So if number 5 Bama beats number 2 Auburn, then in Wisconsin, who is number 4, loses to Ohio State, the same thing happens. Bama still gets in because they won the SEC, but now Georgia gets in. They would have leaped over a 1-loss Georgia, would have leaped over a 3-loss Auburn team. No question about it. I don't care about the head-to-head. There's now a 2-loss difference. And we would have seen Ohio State jump in. Or not Ohio State jump in, but it was Clemson, Bama, Georgia, and who was the 4th team in 2017? So Alabama beat Clemson, Georgia, Oklahoma. It still would have been those 4 teams, whether it was Georgia that beat Alabama or Auburn, or Alabama that beat Auburn. One of the teams that did not play in the SEC title game, who finished 3rd, would have absolutely got in. So, and then it's even more true now in this uneven scheduling format where there's 18 teams in some of these leagues, and you don't play everybody. So it has been comical, sadly. It's been comical, also kind of sad, but mostly funny, I'll be honest, to watch these people lose their minds about Notre Dame getting a bye. Because here's the reality of it. If Notre Dame went 9-3 last year, nobody's crying about how Notre Dame could get a bye this year. They're all mad that Notre Dame's getting a bye because they all know what you know and what I know and what a lot of people in this chat know is they're afraid Notre Dame's got a shot to win this thing. and they don't want any advantages being given to Notre Dame, even if it's just for a season. And that's what they're crying about. And it's been kind of funny to watch that go through.
Well, it's just funny because it's another example of you open up Pandora's box and then there's some repercussions that you might not have thought about. And now everybody wants to cry about it. For example, transfer portal, NIL, conference realignment. File this under the whole, okay, well, we acted on an emotional overreaction, and surprise, surprise, there's stuff that we don't like about it. Who knew? Everybody was screaming from the rooftop, how does Boise State get a bye? How does Arizona State get a bye? You're telling me that on a neutral field that Boise State could beat Alabama? Well, Oklahoma did by 21 points, but that's a different story for later in the show. But with that being said, that's what people were upset about. It doesn't, first round buys can't just go to the conference champion winners. Okay, well, then they don't have to. Good, that's exactly what we wanted. Okay, well, now Notre Dame doesn't. Notre Dame can now get a first round bye. Well, that's stupid. They don't play in a conference at all. But you just said it shouldn't matter if you win the conference to get a first round bye. Well, not for Notre Dame. We just don't want it to be the inferior conferences. We don't want it to be the Big 12. We don't want it to be the ACC. We don't want it to be the Mountain West or Conference USA or whatever the group of 5 automatic bid would be. Ideally, for the Big 2 power conferences, namely the SEC, they just want it to be either all 4 SEC teams or 3 SEC teams and 1 Big 10 team or vice versa. But as long as there's 2, they're happy with it because that's what it would have been last year if that's what it would have been. If there was just straight seeding, you would have had 2 SEC teams and 2 Big 10 teams receiving first-round buys.
Maybe.
Potentially.
Like based on how they voted last year, but I've advocated for the fact that they ranked differently last year because they didn't need to drop people like they did in the past. Because they punished Auburn in 2017 for playing in the SEC title game. We've seen that happen before.
Mm-hmm.
So, but to your point, the way they did vote or the way they did rank, Trev, you would have had 2 Big Tens and 2 SECs last year.
So again, we're starting to see this overreaction and then an overcorrection. And then there's always something that gets overlooked. A lot of times it is Notre Dame because a lot of this has to do with conference tie-ins and things like that. And then people get upset where Notre Dame falls in this. I'm with you, Brian. I think it's funny, to be honest with you at this point. Look, I think that this conversation wouldn't have carried as much weight if the 2 teams last year in the national championship that played for the title both didn't play in conference championships.
Right. Exactly. Neither of them played in the game. So like, how big of an advantage is the buys anyway? You guys are crying about Notre Dame getting a bye in a format where the only season we've seen of this format, the teams that got buys went over, including the 2 teams that would have been exactly the same spot if it was in this year's format. So if last year's ranking was the same as the one for 2025 and it was just straight seeding, number 1 Oregon is still there and number 2 Georgia is still there at 1 and 2. And they both got smacked in the first round. So what would have changed? What would have changed for you? So Texas might still be playing Arizona State. I mean, think about it. Texas would have been probably the 4 seed? Or they were the 3 seed? And they would have played the winner of the 6 and 11 game. Would that not have been possibly Arizona State again? The 5-12 game would have been Notre Dame against Clemson. So then Notre Dame would have played Penn State, same team they had played. Like nothing would have changed. We still would have got the results we got. They just would have happened at different times. So the whole thing is just really, it's a lot of crybaby stuff, to be honest with you. It's like, and here's the thing. You guys keep crying about the consequences of your actions. That's what drives me nuts about the Big Ten and the SEC. The constant crying and whining about the circumstances that they chose to be in. I don't want to hear you crying about having to fly out to California, James Franklin, when your school voted to have 2 LA schools in your league. I don't want to be here you guys crying about uneven scheduling when you're the ones that went and rated multiple leagues. First you rate the SEC. First you rated the Southwest Conference. Then you rated the Big 12. You took some independents along there with you, South Carolina. Then you went and rated the Big 12 again. And now you want to cry about, the strength of schedule and all this other kind of stuff, which in reality is also just utterly false. The Big Ten wants to cry about all these different things. It's like, you guys brought this on yourselves. You guys created this mess. Because here's what if the leagues were the same as they were 2 years ago, here's who would have got buys this year. Texas, Big 12 champ Texas, Pac-12 champ Oregon, Big 10 champ Penn State, SEC champ Georgia. Pretty good system if you ask me. But no, you guys had you greedy you-know-whats had to go out there and destroy those leagues. And then now you want to cry about the consequence. Oh, our league is so hard. Well, maybe you shouldn't have added Texas and Oklahoma to your league then. Well, we had to go play Oklahoma late in the year. And I know that Navy beat them, but, I mean, still, it just the whining from these leagues. You did this to yourselves. You started this. And, hey, look, here's the other thing, Trevor. If we assume that the rankings would have gone as they finished, so I don't think they would have, but let's just assume with that. You're the clowns that cried about a 12-team playoff. You're the ones that wanted a bigger playoff for bigger money. Had you stuck with the way that it was, the top 4 teams, it would have been 2 Big Tens and 2 SECs. We wouldn't be talking about Notre Dame. But no, you guys wanted to go get that money, and now you want to cry about this and that. And then listening to Greg Sankey yesterday, I'm like, you notice a guy that's normally pretty calm starts getting a little angry because deep down he knows he's wrong. He knows he's wrong. I don't need coordinated releases. The Big 12 and the ACC didn't have any type of release, much less a coordinated one. So you're being factually inaccurate there. And then the other thing that he says, which just drove me nuts, and this is the other part of it, the crying from the SEC and their supporters in the media. This is a comment from Greg Sankey yesterday. It's clear that not losing becomes in many ways more important than beating the University of Georgia, which 2 of our teams that were left out did. He said in a reference to, this is in an article at CBS Sports. He said he makes that comment, and then Kalen DeBoer also says today or yesterday, you wonder what would have happened if other people would have played our schedule. And I'm like, are you guys being serious right now? So why isn't the Big Ten advocating for Michigan to get in? They beat Ohio State. They had to play Oregon and lost to Oregon. They had to play Indiana and lost to Indiana. So aren't we? Because they're not stupid. Because they look at it and say, okay, yes, you beat Georgia. Great. Wonderful. I think that says more about Georgia than it does those teams. But we're supposed to just, he says, it's clear that not losing becomes in many ways more important than beating. Yeah, it is. Don't lose to Kentucky, and your win over Georgia looks a lot better, Ole Miss. Hey, Bama, here's a thought. Don't lose to a pair of 6-6 teams in a regular season. Let me rephrase. Just beat one of those 2 6-6 teams, and you're in the playoff. And this constant crying about how, not losing matters more than strength of schedule and all. He's whining about strength of schedule. I'm like, well, listen, this is the thing that people just consistently get wrong, especially SEC people who are just, I swear, man, I don't know. I'll tell you what I think happened to the SEC, but need I remind you all that if you look at the rankings for last year, strength of schedule absolutely freaking mattered last season. How do I know that? Because a 2-loss Georgia team was all the way up to number 2. A 2-loss Texas team stayed at 3, and a 2-loss Penn State team stayed at 4. I want to also remind you that a 2-loss SEC team ranked ahead of a 1-loss Indiana team and an undefeated Boise State team, a 1-loss Boise State team. I want to also remind you that a 3-loss Alabama team finished ranked higher than the Big 12 champs, 10-2 Miami, and the ACC champs in Clemson. 2 other 3-loss SEC teams ranked ahead of Clemson last year. Not after before the ACC title game, after the ACC title game. 3 teams from the SEC that had 3 losses ranked ahead of 2-loss BYU, who had a regular season win over an at-large playoff team on the road, beating SMU. So you can't cry about strength of schedule apparently not mattering when the fact that we were even having the conversation is why you were there. Why isn't the Big Ten crying about Illinois being in? They're a 3-loss team. They played in a tough league because they know that the overall resume isn't good enough. I don't care that that these teams beat Georgia. Well, so did Notre Dame, and now you guys are crying about them getting a bye. The fact is it's losing is why those teams did not get into the playoff last year. It's not about, well, Indiana had an easier schedule. The fact that it was even a conversation against a 1-loss Indiana team is because they consider strength of schedule. But you can't lose to a pair of 6-6 teams and get in. You can't lose to a team that went 4-8 and get in. So not losing does become important because it's don't lose to teams that suck. And if you don't lose to teams that suck, you're in the playoff. It's really simple. A 2-loss Alabama team absolutely would have been in the playoff last year over a 2-loss SMU team. That's absolutely a fact. No question about it whatsoever. Alabama last year, if they don't lose to Oklahoma, is in the college football playoff last year. There's no question about it. Because let me remind you how the rankings looked before the loss to Oklahoma. Before the loss to Oklahoma and before Ole Miss lost to even with a 4-8 loss to Kentucky, lost to an 8-4 or 7-5 Florida team. Let me remind you what happened in November before that. Bama was ranked 7th, ahead of 1-loss Miami. Ole Miss was ranked ahead of Georgia and ranked higher than a 1-loss Boise State team, a 1-loss SMU team, a 1-loss BYU team, and an undefeated Army team. Why? Strength of schedule. Why did they fall out? Because they lost. They lost to mediocre to bad teams. They lost to an Oklahoma team who then went on in the college football or in the postseason and lost to Navy. Best response I saw today. It was like Oklahoma lost in a land battle to Navy. It was great. It was absolutely wonderful response. But it's real simple, guys. Don't lose to those teams that suck late in the year. Don't choke in November and you're in the playoffs. It's real simple. How do I know that? Because look where you were ranked. You were ranked 7th and 9th. Alabama was 7th and Ole Miss was 9th. Alabama was 7th with 2 losses. A loss to 6-6 Vanderbilt was ahead of Florida, whose only loss at the time was to a similar Georgia Tech team, 6-6, 7-5 type of team. Miami got punished for that, despite having a blowout win at Florida to start the season. That same Florida team that beat Ole Miss. So if anybody wants to cry about not being in the playoffs and cry about how, about all these different things, then Miami has a much bigger beef than Ole Miss and Alabama do. Because they played an SEC team that beat one of y'all and smoked them. Smoked them. So, and one of the teams that beat Miami took Georgia to like 7 overtimes last year. Your champ at Georgia. So it is really just really petty and absurd and just easily provably false. Like the only reason that you guys were even in the conversation with 3 losses was because of your strength of schedule. So yeah, don't lose to Vanderbilt. I got a tip this year for all you SC teams that want to get into the playoff. You ready for it? I'm going to give this to y'all for free. Don't lose to Vanderbilt. Don't lose to a 4-8 team in your league that got destroyed by a mediocre ACC team in Louisville. Don't get whooped at home by Oklahoma, who sucked last year and lost to Navy. It's real simple. You want to get in? Don't lose to teams that suck. And then your win over Georgia means more. You're welcome, guys. You're welcome. Plan accordingly. Have some fun with that.
Yeah, I didn't think that 2025 was going to be the year that the SEC as a conference found out that winning gets you into the playoffs. I didn't think that that was going to be a topic of conversation that we had to have going into this playoff. In all seriousness, it's a relatively simple equation like you just laid out. But if teams were only being measured on getting in by wins, then Vanderbilt should have been in the playoffs because they beat Alabama.
Yep.
If there's any team that should be complaining about who's getting buys and who's getting what, I mean, Georgia, even though they received a buy, should be like, yo, dude, I watched the kind of teams that Arizona State and Boise State played. I know we got to buy, and we can look at this saying we also got to buy, and this isn't all created equal. Because on our road to get a bye, they had to play, at the time, number 14 Clemson at a neutral site, number 4 Alabama on the road, number 1 Texas on the road, number 16 Ole Miss on the road, number 7 Tennessee at home, and then Texas again in the SEC championship game. And they're looking at that saying like, whoa. Based on this playoff setting and how these teams are seeded, the team directly below us played like 2 ranked teams all season long. That's how it goes down. Georgia has more of a cry about that than what Alabama does because Georgia won in their schedule. If there's any team that has an excuse for going into 8 overtimes with Georgia Tech, it's Georgia.
But what did Georgia do in that game?
Won.
They won. Who'd Georgia lose to? Georgia lost 3 games last year. Who'd they lose to? Notre Dame, Ole Miss, and Bama. Really good teams, right?
Mm-hmm.
I love Ballpeen Shillelagh had a great comment. He said, and if you lose to a team who sucks early in the season, Alabama, Ole Miss, don't do it again. He's got a great point because the early season losses to Kentucky at home and Vanderbilt on the road by Ole Miss and Alabama respectively would have still got them in with 2 losses had they not done it again in November. I mean, the ACC should be sitting there saying, hold on a second. If y'all are going to cry about those 3-loss teams getting in, where's Miami? Because Miami beat one of the teams that you're talking about. So, I mean, what are we talking about here? Miami beat a Louisville team that went and played one of your teams last year, one of the teams that beat Ole Miss last year. I mean, heck, Louisville and Ole Miss have a common opponent, and right? Don't they? Didn't they both play Kentucky? Louisville played Kentucky at Kentucky, beat them 41-14. Louisville beat Georgia Tech. They had a common opponent with Georgia, beat them convincingly. Who'd Louisville lose to last year? They lost by a touchdown to a Notre Dame team that went to the title game. They lost by a touchdown to SMU and a touchdown to Miami. Well, they lost to a bad Stanford team. Okay, so now we're going to count bad losses if it's an ACC team, but we're supposed to ignore them if it's a team over here? Because I watched ACC teams play some of these SEC teams that you guys thought were so difficult, and they smacked them. I mean, Florida, 41-17 lost to Miami. So,
well, it just goes back into what you and I talked about on this show a couple days ago, last week, is that there's this idea that even though it's the same team, it's harder because it's in the same conference. That is a legitimate argument that people, same roster, it could be played on a neutral field, and it could be equidistant from each campus. So there's not, like the whole, yes, it was a neutral site game when Notre Dame played Georgia Tech, but it was in Atlanta. I'm talking equidistant from each campus, same teams, doesn't matter. If one of the matchups is interconference and the other one is out of conference, the interconference automatically means more for a reason that I just don't understand.
Right.
I will never get that. It's like, well, they're still a bad team. It's like, yeah, but it's a Big Ten matchup.
Mm-hmm.
And
what does that mean? Right. Well, there's one of these, I'm going to be nice. I'm not going to call anybody names today, saying, well, Notre Dame lost at home to Northern Illinois. That kills your argument. No, it doesn't. Because what's the whole point we're making here? It's not the one bad loss you had. It's the second bad loss you had. Alabama lost 3 games last year. One of them was to a Tennessee team that was pretty decent. The other 2 were 2 losses. Notre Dame played similar bad teams late in the year, and guess what they did? They beat them. Notre Dame played Navy last season. Notre Dame played Georgia Tech last season. Smacked both of them. So they didn't choke in November. So if you don't know the difference between 3 versus 1, 3 losses to 1 loss, well, you have a math problem that goes way back further than having an ability to understand a football argument. I mean, it's what's frustrating is, or what's funny about it is, deep down, they're still just mad about NIL. That's what this comes down to. Well, the SEC was a dominant league for decades. Oh, they were. They were. And they may be again. They had a down year. And their down year has caused all these SEC fans to lose their ever-loving minds, to where people who I thought were somewhat intelligent say stupid things, like people that we saw from Georgia talking about how, well, we'll still beat you even with Gunner Stockton because you're not very good. Then when Notre Dame beats them by 13, well, we would have beat you if we had Carson Beck. That's not what you said 3 days ago. 3 days ago, you said a 10-point Georgia win's now down to a 7-point Georgia win. Now you want to tell me that the 13-point Georgia loss is only because of who you had at quarterback? Your turnover-prone quarterback against the best turnover defense in college football? Okay, sure. But here's what it boils down to. The SEC can't do it the way they've done it for all those years. They can't stockpile their rosters. They can't buy players and stuff them on their roster when they're the only team they're the only league that was really buying players like that of the good leagues. Now everybody can buy players. And guess what? Back-to-back years, your league gets whipped multiple times. Bama got beat by Michigan last year. And then this year, Georgia gets smacked by Notre Dame. The only SEC team to do anything positive in the postseason in the last 2 years is a team you stole out of the Big 12. But the SEC's had one traditional team in the Final Four the last 2 years. One. It's not a coincidence that happened around the same time as NIL. Something that they were you're the ones that started throwing out all these ridiculous contracts for quarterbacks that hadn't done anything. Notre Dame didn't do that. Ohio State didn't do that. You want to cry because you go and steal a defensive end from Ohio State, throw a bunch of money at him, and then you're mad that he then leaves you for Missouri just for a bunch of money. I still love the quote that Sean Davis made a few weeks ago. He goes, you lose them how you got them. And that's what's happening now. And you can tell by the vitriol coming out of it that they know. They know they don't have a leg to stand on. They're hoping that their anger can mask the lack of a rational argument. They're hoping that their frustration can mask that. Oh, here we go. We have a winner of stupidest post of the day. Our resident, I don't know if this idiot's an SEC fan or a Big Ten fan, join a conference and give me a call. Why? They don't need to. Have you been paying attention? Notre Dame wasn't in the conference last year, beat the SEC champs, beat 2 Big Ten teams, made it to the title game. Now, not being in the conference, Notre Dame can get a bye. Why should they join a conference? So that you can feel better about yourself, so you don't make stupid arguments and in chats of shows and where you have nothing to say. Oh, you lost to Northern Illinois. Beat Georgia. Yeah, lost to Northern Illinois. I'll take it. Beat Georgia. Beat Texas A&M. Beat Penn State. That's where I'm at. So I don't really need to join the conference if I'm Notre Dame, because we can beat your best without it. So cry some more. Because here's the deep, dark secret. If they could survive on their own, they could. And that's where this resentment comes from. Talking with somebody yesterday, goes, I don't have an issue with Notre Dame being an independent. Well, then why are you advocating for a rule that only punishes Notre Dame? And I had some other idiot was like, Notre Dame's playing by a different set of rules. And I said, show me the rule that says you have to be in a league. Show me the rule. Show me the rule that says Notre Dame is, show me the exemption that the NCAA gave Notre Dame to be independent. Show me the rule. Explain to me how Notre Dame is doing something that everyone else can do. Anyone can be an independent. If Florida State said, we don't want to be in the ACC anymore, So when our contract is up, we're going to go back to being independent. Guess what would happen to them? Nothing. They could go be an independent. If West Virginia did that, if Penn State did that, guess what they could do? Could go back to being independent. Why don't they, Trevor? Because they can't. They're not able to survive on their own. Notre Dame can. And you're in your feelings about that. Yeah, they lost to Marshall. Still beat Georgia. Still beat Penn State. Here's a trick. Here's a tip for you. When you say something stupid, it's a bad idea to double down with something even more stupid. And I said I wasn't going to call people names, but you're doing it.
And factually incorrect. If you are going to throw the Marshall loss back in Notre Dame's face, it was 2 years ago. It wasn't the prior year. There's a thing called Google. Kurt Signetti knows about it. Go look it up on Google.
And did Notre Dame make the playoff that year? No, they did not. Why? Because they lost. They lost 4 games. They didn't deserve to be in. They didn't get in.
It's just a simple answer. Handle business. Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois. 100%. And then they won 13 straight games, 11 of which by double digits. Made it to the national championship. I'll even give you a better example of a team that didn't handle business the last week of the regular season and lost to a 6-5 team at home and then won the national championship. It's Ohio State. But how were they still able to make it with 2 losses and losing in the last week of the regular season to a team that wasn't sniffing the top 25 rankings? Because they handled business beforehand. And then they went into the playoffs and beat the first 2 teams that they played by a combined margin of victory, like 65 points. You handle business. The SEC's soft. I said it live on air, May 27th. They're soft. Texas had a chance to beat Ohio State. And what'd they do on the goal line? They puckered and turned soft.
That's right.
And got absolutely mutilated.
That's right.
Notre Dame played the SEC champs. What happened in the trenches? They got absolutely worked. They scored 10 points in 60 minutes of football. But you're going to tell me that the SEC is tough to play in? Oklahoma, the offseason champions of the whatever, played Navy, a triple option team with an offense fresh out of 1922, and lost.
Mm-hmm.
But
what happened in that Alabama-Michigan game? What happened in that Alabama-Michigan game, Trev, when Michigan was missing like their top 6 players? All those first-round draft picks didn't play in that game. What happened? What happened to them in that game, Trev?
Got dominated in the trenches. Vanderbilt, historically the worst SEC program in your conference, never gave up a lead against Alabama, one of your 2 flagship teams in the SEC. But you're going to tell me that Alabama would go into South Bend and beat Notre Dame? Touch grass. Like, I don't understand that train of thought. Don't understand that train of thought. Truly don't. Truly don't. Sometimes people just have to tell themselves some whack stuff to help them.
The frustrating thing about what the SEC is saying right now, Trevor, is because it's unbecoming of the Premier League in college football. It's unbecoming. It's not, hey, you know what? We got to get better. We got to get better. Our conference champ went out in the Sugar Bowl, and got smacked by Notre Dame in the Sugar Bowl. Oh, we're missing our starting quarterback. And Notre Dame was missing 6 starters in that game?
You mean the starting quarterback they didn't ask to come back?
Right. Exactly. So your number 2 team in the SEC, a team that ran the table in the regular season in year 1 of being in your league, except for what? Losing to Georgia. That's the only team to beat them. They went out, needed overtime to beat Arizona State, and then did what? What happened against Ohio State? Got beat. Why? Because they couldn't score from 1 yard out. Alabama. What happened to Alabama? They went out, got smacked by Vanderbilt, got smacked by Oklahoma. And the thing about that game is they were not fluky games. Alabama never led against Vanderbilt. Not for a second of that game did they have a lead against Vanderbilt. They got dominated by Oklahoma. Dominated. Ole Miss got beat at home by Kentucky, a team that Louisville beat by 27 points. So instead of saying, hey, you know what? We got to go out and get better. We got to get better. You're hearing all this crying about the schedule. Oh, what would other teams have done if they'd have played our schedule? I know a lot of teams that wouldn't have had 3 losses against Alabama's schedule. I know a lot of teams that wouldn't have had 3 losses against that schedule because they would have beat Oklahoma. They would have beat Vanderbilt. I know some teams that might have gone undefeated against that schedule because they could have certainly beat Tennessee. Oh, they beat Georgia. Well, so did Notre Dame, more convincingly than what Bama did. Bama blew a 28-0 lead against Georgia. So here's the deal. They should be going out there saying, hey, we need to get better. But instead of saying we need to get better, they're trying to rig the game to make it easier for them to win. That's what's happening, and that's what's so disappointing. You're the leader of the the sport, allegedly. It's a bad look. It's an unbecoming look when your fans jump into chats and all they do is just cry about, oh, join a conference because that's the only thing my small, tiny brain can think of. You know, it's like you get people who run shows, big shows that cover the sport. I'm mad in my feelings because Notre Dame's not in a conference because I got nothing else. When you make stupid arguments, all it does is make you look weak. When Greg Sankey says the things he says, it makes you look soft. When Kalen DeBoer, who I have a great deal of respect for, says what he says, dude, it makes you look soft. You lost to Oklahoma. Bad. You lost to Vanderbilt in a game you never led. It makes you look soft. It makes me rethink having you in my top 5 in the preseason. Because I don't know if you have what it takes to win now. Because you're soft. That's the concern. Get better. Get better.
Well, and it's crazy because that quote from Kalen DeBoer is coming from a coach who literally a year prior took care of business. Which is something that, again, just doesn't make sense to me. It's not like Kalen DeBoer grew up in the SEC. He turned Washington's program around within a year of each other and then made it into the college football playoffs and had a national championship game appearance. On the way to that, at the time, they beat a ranked Oregon team, a ranked USC team on the road, a ranked Utah team at home, a ranked Oregon team on the road, Oregon State team on the road, and then beat Oregon again in a rematch by the same margin of victory in the conference championship, beat Texas by 6 in the first round, and then lost to Michigan. But point being is they handled business. And that same coach is now whining about it. It should be easier for them and other teams should try to play that schedule. Dude, you played that schedule a year ago and handled business, and you were rewarded with a playoff appearance. And then you didn't the following year, and then you weren't rewarded with a playoff appearance. And and there's no comprehension there.
A year before you had to beat Oregon twice. A year before you had to beat Oregon twice to get into the college football playoff. Twice. And you handle business. It's just, it's amazing to see. You beat Boise State the year before. Had to beat a 10-win Arizona team on the road. You beat Texas in the semifinals to get to the championship game. I mean, you know what Washington didn't do in 2023? Lose to a couple 6-6 teams. Because if he would have, guess what he'd been doing at playoff time? Sitting at home, eating Cheetos. That's the thing that's frustrating is like when Notre Dame had the bad losses they had in 2023, when Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois, you didn't hear Marcus Freeman making hey, it's unfair. We should have had a bye week the week after we played Texas A&M. It's unfair that we had to play this game. No, we got to get better. Did you hear anything about Ryan Day? It's unfair that we have to play Michigan last game of the year every year. It's unfair. It's unfair that we got to go through this gauntlet of a schedule, and then at the end of the year we got to play a big game like Michigan the week before the Big Ten title game. It's unfair. They had nothing to lose. It's totally unfair. No excuses from a coach that usually kind of makes a lot of excuses. No excuses. But then they go out and get beat like they did. Do you honestly think, Trev, if Texas or Georgia would have won the national title, that we'd be sitting there having the same conversation? Of course we wouldn't.
No, I think even if an SEC team made it to the national title game, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Honestly. Possibly. Yeah. Like they just want to be there. The fact that they hadn't won it in 2 years now, losing to teams from the North.
Yep.
Just gets under their skin.
Yep.
But the fact of the matter is in 2 seasons, they haven't even had an SEC team in the championship game to win it.
Right. Yep. Archer 452, resident Ohio State fan, says it'd be one thing if they played Florida's schedule last year, which is again, or Georgia's.
Yep.
They lost to Vanderbilt and got whooped by Oklahoma. And that's the whole thing is, if anybody in the league wanted to complain about the schedule last year, it should be guys like Billy Napier and Kirby Smart. And Kirby Smart did talk about it after he won. After they beat Texas, he talked about the schedule. He didn't talk about how unfair the schedule was when Notre Dame beat them. I haven't heard a peep from Kirby Smart.
Not a one. And you know how Kirby Smart was rewarded after their gauntlet of a schedule and still winning the SEC last year? This year they play at Tennessee, home against Bama, at Auburn, home against Ole Miss, home against Florida, home against Texas. No complaining about schedules. Because Kirby Smart, the reason why he has 2 national titles is because the guy understands how to handle business. That's why they didn't lose to Georgia Tech in 8 overtimes.
Right. Down what, 17-0?
Mm-hmm.
Something like that?
That's why they were able to.
Down 28-0 to Bama?
Mm-hmm.
What'd they do?
Mm-hmm. That's why they were able to come back in a rematch against Texas with a backup quarterback.
Losing at halftime when their starter went out, came back and won that football game.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what's funny is the people who have the opportunity to go out there and cry about it are the ones that or actually have a legitimate reason to cry about it or not crying about it. And for Greg Sankey, it's a really bad look because number one, it's whiny. And number two, it's just false. I mean, you can't sit there and tell me that strength of schedule didn't matter and you're crying about that when your 2-loss league champ was the 2 seed. When you had 2 3-loss teams ranked ahead of the Big 12 champ who had 2 losses. When you had a 2-loss team that didn't even play in the conference championship game ahead of a 1-loss Big 10 team. The only reason we're even talking about Bama and South Carolina and Ole Miss is because of the strength of schedule, which I don't think was all that hard last year because, again, the league wasn't as good. We told you before the season the league wasn't going to be as good. I told you guys all last offseason the SEC was not going to be as good as it had been. This year, I think it's going to be better. I've said this. I think Bama's going to be better. I think LSU is going to be better. I think A&M's going to be better. I think Georgia's going to take a little bit of a step back, but I think there's going to be – and I think Ole Miss might take a little bit of a step back. But there's a lot of teams in that league I think are going to be better this year. It's going to be deeper this year because that's how football goes. There's years where leagues are just not as good for a host of reasons. One thing we talked about last year, quarterback play wasn't that good in the league. It's a very overhyped quarterback play. And a lot of your most talented quarterbacks were younger guys that were still kind of learning their way. Now, I can't wait till DJ Lagway's a junior. We're going to have a different conversation. That's another team I expect to be better this year. That's the whole point is it's get better. Get better. It's that simple. But and then also don't say things that are just verifiably false. Like you said earlier, use Google. I mean, but here's the reason Greg Sankey doesn't push back on it is he knows that for the most part, the national media is not going to come at him for it.
Mm-hmm.
They're just going to sop it up. Why? Because the biggest member of the national media, ESPN, never criticizes the SEC because they're in a contract together. It's not real news. They're the mouthpiece for the league. Simple as that. So it's a really bad look, but I rather enjoy it. It fires me up to hear it because if it wasn't for the fact that Notre Dame was in the championship game, like there's 2 things that broke the SEC. One is Notre Dame's success. I think it's well known that Greg Sankey's not a big fan of Notre Dame. It's very well known.
What?
I think the fact that Notre Dame smacked their champ, and what made it worse, did it in the Sugar Bowl, I think kind of broke his head a little bit, broke his mind a little bit. And then I think the other thing is just watching the Big Ten, like the SEC kind of thought they were going to bring the Big Ten along as like, you're coming up, we're the two biggest, but we're still the bad boys. And now all of a sudden the Big Ten's like, hold on a second. We're the bad boys now. You guys are now after us. We've won back-to-back national championships. We're the league that's smacking your conference around. And I think those two realities have kind of broke Greg Sankey's brain. Because the stuff he was saying today and yesterday, Trevor, was just logically incoherent. If I can be so rough in my assessment, but it's just a fact. So I have to ask the question: how much of a gift? That's actually something I said to somebody else. Here's what he said: it's clear that not losing becomes in many ways more important than beating the University of Georgia, which two of our teams that were left out did. Like, that is such a logically incoherent statement, because they weren't left out because they beat Georgia. They were left out. Yeah, not losing is – when did not losing become something that, like, we're supposed to just ignore losing 2 games to bad teams because you beat Georgia? So should South Carolina have been in the playoffs in 2019? They went 4-8, but they beat Georgia at home. Like, it makes no sense. It's logically incoherent. So not losing becomes in many ways more important than what? Like, what are you even trying to say? Yeah, not losing to Vanderbilt, Kentucky, Florida, and Oklahoma, yeah, it's more important than beating Georgia. Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. That's why Michigan's not in the playoff. Michigan beat the champs. Why aren't they crying about it? Well, they lost to exactly. They lost to Minnesota, or who'd they lose to? They lost to Texas. They lost to Oregon. They lost to Indiana. Who's the other 2 teams that beat Michigan last year? They lost to. Hold on a second.
They lost to Texas. They lost
to Texas. Oregon. They lost to Washington. They lost to Illinois on the road. They lost to Oregon. They lost to Indiana. That's pretty good teams that beat them last year. Hey, we beat Ohio State in Columbus. Texas couldn't do that. Notre Dame couldn't do that. Oregon couldn't do that. We beat them. Why isn't Michigan? Because they lost to insert teams. I mean, how many teams last year, Trev? Like, what was the? How many teams can sit here and say last year that they had to play 3 top 10 teams last year? 4 top 10 teams last year. Michigan did. They had to play Texas, who's top 4. They had to play Oregon, who's number 1. They had to play a top 10 Indiana team, and they had to play a top 10 Ohio State team. Beat Ohio State, beat the champs. Why aren't we talking about them getting in? Is there a games lost threshold that we're okay saying you don't belong in because you lost X number of games? The whole point you're making is, I guess Michigan not losing is more important than them beating Ohio State in Columbus. I mean, that he's basically saying the same thing. What's the difference between 3 losses and 5? They beat Ohio State. That's the argument, right? Well, they beat Ohio State. He beat Ohio State. Just like they beat Georgia. Okay, great. They beat Georgia. If only they could have beat Kentucky, you might be onto something. But why isn't Michigan in? Because they weren't good. They played great that one Saturday. Wonderful. That was a great day for Michigan. But Michigan fans know they didn't belong in the playoff last year. Why don't because there's a sense of entitlement. That's what it comes down to. There's a sense of entitlement with Greg Sankey and SEC fans because they have been dominating the sport for so long.
Sure.
But what we've come to find out is as the sport gets expanded and you're now forced to play more good teams out of conference, but then in the playoff, all of a sudden you don't look so dominant.
I think there's a misconception too around some of these losses that like some of these teams had, like Notre Dame losing to Northern Illinois, Ohio State's lost to Michigan, things like that. People act like there was no repercussion for those when they bring up Notre Dame losing to Northern Illinois and still making the postseason, for example. Notre Dame went from 5th to 18th. It's not like they stayed at 5th.
Right.
And they're like,
Exactly.
yeah, well, they're probably still going to make the – no, they got punished at the time. If you don't believe me, go back and watch the Irish Breakdown post-game show. We got a super chat that asked, is Notre Dame's playoffs hopes still alive? And we talked about that for 25 minutes. And the common consensus between all of us on the post-game show was, I just hope they can beat Purdue.
Mm-hmm.
It was not talking about USC in November. It wasn't even talking about Louisville on the 28th. It was, I just watched this Notre Dame team lose to a MAC team.
Mm-hmm.
I just hope they can go on the road in the Big Ten and win. And then the wins kept stacking and stacking. They rattled off 10 straight. 9 of them were by double digits. They beat Louisville when they were ranked. They beat Navy when they were ranked. They beat Army when they were ranked. They beat USC in the Coliseum and was the only team out of all 12 regular season opponents that USC had to have a lead in the fourth quarter against USC. And so through all of that journey, Notre Dame made it back into the graces of making the college football playoffs. Yes, they were still able to host. They weren't the 5 seed. If Notre Dame didn't lose to Northern Illinois but lost to like a Louisville, I think the committee would have been more apt to put them ahead of Penn State. Because during that stretch of time, Penn State was maintaining in the rankings because of a big factor. And that's like, well, Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois.
That's the argument we kept making is you look at Notre Dame, they're a better team than Penn State. I argued all year they're a better team than Georgia. But why weren't they ranked ahead of those teams? Because they lost to Northern Illinois. They didn't do it again. This is what some of these small-brained people don't understand. The point we're saying is that not that Bama doesn't belong in because they lost to Vanderbilt or because they lost to Oklahoma. It's because they lost to both of them. We're not saying Ole Miss doesn't belong in because they lost to 4-8 Kentucky, although I think losing to a 4-8 football team should be an automatic disqualifier. But it's not that. It's not that they lost to Florida. It's not that they pissed away a game to LSU, where the only time they trailed was in overtime. It's that they lost all of them.
Well, and to follow that up, the last thing I'll say on this whole thing, for the teams, for the people that are demanding, so Alabama should have made the, but you're telling me Alabama couldn't have done what SMU did, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah, they could have absolutely done what SMU did. Get their butt kicked in the first round of the playoff.
That's my point.
They would have done exactly what Indiana did. They got smacked. What did we say at the time, Trevor? I'm sorry. Go ahead, man. I cut you off. You got me fired up. Make your point.
No, you're good. Point being, the argument is never what happens once they make it in. It's always just, why weren't they in?
Mm-hmm.
You're telling me SMU's better than Bama? They were last year. Tell me IU's a better football team than Ole Miss? Sure were last year. But the conversation always ends there. It's the argument is never, I think, based on this, and this criteria, how this team is put together, they could have caught fire and went on a run. It's never that. It's just we should have been in.
Right.
Okay, let's say you get in. You think you're traveling to Columbus and beating them?
That's the whole point. And that's the whole reason why they're advocating for the automatic qualifiers. Because it's not about winning it. It's about they want to get in and get the money. That's it. They want to get in and get the money. And remember what we said last year? We were bummed that Alabama lost. We wanted Alabama. I thought playing Indiana was much more risky than playing Alabama for 2 reasons. Number one, there was the risk of overlooking Indiana. And I remember watching the Here Come to Irish thing, and this is after the fact, but hearing Benjamin Morrison saying to Marcus Freeman exactly what we were saying at that time, which was one of our concerns, you see that it was. Number 2, Indiana had a better defense than Alabama did last year. They did. And Jalen Milroe couldn't complete a pass. Notre Dame would have had no problem with Alabama. But here's the thing. You would have absolutely got Notre Dame's A game. Absolutely got Notre Dame's A game. You're telling me that you actually think that Notre Dame would have not destroyed Alabama last year? oh my gosh, you're insane. Like now you're just clowning yourself.
Especially now that we know what we know.
Yes.
Like at the time, if you want to make the argument, and a lot of the argument would have been fueled by previous history, and you remember 2012, remember 2020, yada, 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 fine, whatever. At the time, if you wanted to scream from the rooftops, because we even said at the time, Alabama's a team that Notre Dame has not conquered yet.
Right. Which is why we wanted Alabama, because we knew they would have conquered that. They would have done 100%. That.
But now knowing what we know and watching what Notre Dame did in the playoffs and beating the SEC champs, there's still people making the argument that Alabama would have came into South Bend and
they would have got
Notre
they
Dame.
Couldn't even beat Michigan. Oh, they didn't care about that game. Well, then why did Jalen Milroe play? It's the SEC got exposed last year.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was a down year. That's why Georgia got smacked by Notre Dame in a game where Notre Dame passed for less than 100 yards and still beat Georgia by 13. You know, it's just Texas got beat, barely beat Arizona State. Michigan got smacked. South Carolina got smacked by Illinois. It just, instead of just saying, hey, you know what, we got to get better. We got to get better. And I think they will. I think the SEC is going to have a much better year this year. Trev, I sent you yesterday. I sent you and Vince last night, actually, my prediction as I currently have it.
That's right.
Of the national championship, the tournament, and who I have winning it all. I won't tell you who I have, but I'll tell you all this. I got 2 SEC teams in the Final Four. Do I not?
Mm-hmm.
How many Big Ten teams do I have in the Final Four? None. Because I think it's going to be a bit of a down year for the Big Ten overall, and then I think there's some buys that are not going to work out great for them. But I've got 2 SEC teams in the Final Four because I think the SEC is going to be better this year. But instead of just saying, hey, we got to get better, you hear all this crybaby stuff from the league. And it's unbecoming of the alleged leader of the sport. And the reality is they never were. They might have been the best league, but they've always been about what's best for the SEC. That's why Greg Sankey gets so hard in his feelings when he gets asked about the good of the sport. I'm not going to be lectured, blah, blah. Like you're crying now. Because once again, you said something verifiably false. The Big 12 never made a statement. The ACC never made a statement. Their commissioners in comments said, this is why we're doing what we're doing. Just because, see, this is the thing is sometimes when people say things, sometimes you can get fired up just because you're fired up about something. But sometimes, especially people who don't normally get fired up, when they start getting real defensive about stuff, you know you struck a nerve. Because deep down, he knows. Not even deep down. I think it's right here. He knows he doesn't care about the game. He knows he doesn't care about what's good for college football. He cares about we're going to make the most money we can, which to a degree is kind of part of his job. But you also have to do that while also realizing that there's a line you can cross that diminishes the overall sport, which then means down the road it's going to be less possible for you to make that kind of money. But most of these people in leadership don't care. It's the same thing with politics. A lot of people don't care about the massive debt we have because they're not going to be the ones that have to suffer the consequences of it. They're going to do their thing now, and some future SEC commissioner is going to have to deal with the fallout if the sport is no longer what it is. It's not going to be my problem. But just be honest about it. Don't get all up in your feelings and start saying things that are just literally just, dude, it took me 2 minutes to prove that all those things that you said are just not true. Oh, what, Indiana, didn't belong in this. Well, they were behind a 2-loss SEC team in the playoff rankings. Think about that. They were behind Tennessee in the rankings. Why? Strength of schedule. Why was Alabama ahead of Miami? Why was Alabama ahead of Arizona State and Clemson? Strength of schedule. So it just it was a bad look, to be completely honest with you. It was a very bad look. And I would have just rather them have said, hey, let's take the high road. Look, we got to get better. I think this is what they should have said. There was like no moment of humility. Like, you know what? The way the postseason played out, I think things like, because if you were really trying to look out for the sport, hey, look, we're not worried about last year. The way the season played out, it was obvious that, it wasn't our year. Wasn't our year. Way things played out, best team won it all. Our champ had a shot to do some damage. I mean, the bracket couldn't have been laid out any better for Georgia, according to what SEC fans think. They don't think Notre Dame's any good, and they got to play their quarterfinal game in the Sugar Bowl. And what happened? They got smacked. Texas had their shot. Where was that game played between Texas and Ohio State?
Was that the
Yeah.
Yep.
Cotton Bowl
Mm-hmm.
in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And you lost. I mean, literally the path was laid out right there for you. And none of your teams could get to the title game. Then Bama goes out, and Tennessee gets obliterated by Ohio State. Bama gets smacked by Michigan. Oklahoma loses to Navy. South Carolina loses to Illinois. Literally, 2 of your 3 teams you cry about deserving a shot got beat by inferior Big Ten teams in a bowl game. Well, bowl games don't matter. Okay, well, what was your record in the old college football playoffs? Because they had, 3 teams in last year?
Yep.
And what was their record? 2-3. And only one of those teams was responsible for those 2. And you needed overtime to beat a team that ranked as the 4 seed, but was actually the second lowest ranked team in the playoff. Literally the only 2 wins the SEC had were over the 2 lowest seeded teams in the playoff. And you and I said this, if anybody had a beef last year, it was Oregon. If anybody had a beef about the seeding last year, it was the Big Ten. Why does our best team have to play against our most talented team in the second round?
Yeah.
How fair was that? Wasn't. But is the Big Ten crying about it? No, because you know why? Because the Big Ten went out and handled business. Because they went out and won a title. Because their teams handled business in the playoffs. That's why they're not crying about it. Penn State won 2 games. What was the record of the Big Ten in the playoff last year, Trev? Wasn't it 4, 5, 6? So it's 6-3. That's why you don't hear the Big Ten crying about it. Now, I'm not a Big Ten defender at all, but you get the point. They're not crying about it. Go handle business. You're just mad because Notre Dame and the Big Ten are smacking you around now. So get better. Get better. So anyway, that's enough of that conversation. Plenty of rants there. I feel a little bit better getting that off my chest.
As do I. To tie a bow on this conversation, still talking about the college football playoff kind of debate here. Do we think that the ACC and the Big 12, did they hold firm?
Mm-mm. Yeah, based on the responses from the Big Ten and the SEC, I don't think that they were able to get any concessions. It doesn't sound like they just kind of gave in to give in, thinking that, if we just give in now, that then they'll look out for us down the road. And I just think that was very naive. I think Jim Phillips, unfortunately, is a very weak leader of the ACC. He is exactly kind of what you expect a guy that came from Northwestern to be.
Sure.
Just not tough, not strong. Not a guy that really will take whatever leverage he has and use it to the hilt. He's just kind of a go along to get along guy. And I think it doesn't do the ACC well. And I think the Big 12 here's where I think a lot of the the saber rattling that's happening that could impact the sport is coming from. It's not coming from the ACC, unfortunately. I think the ACC is kind of too busy keeping its own league together. It's coming from the Big 12 and Notre Dame. Because what did they say? One of the articles I read, one of the Big 12 ADs, and they didn't say who, basically was like, if they go down this path of 4-4-2-2, it's war. Well, what does war mean? Lawsuits. So I wonder if part of the Notre Dame thing was trying to appease Notre Dame. I don't think they realize how little Notre Dame cares about getting a bye. Matter of fact, I don't think that Notre Dame's overly thrilled about it, but I think Notre Dame had to stand firm and say, hey, listen, you can't punish us only. And Notre Dame has said this. If they had their own way, they'd rather host a playoff game. They were totally fine not getting it. But you can't then get rid of the conference championship requirement and then still keep us out, because now you're like, Notre Dame had to fight back against that on principle.
Yeah.
They couldn't allow a precedent to be set that said we can create adversarial rules that only impact Notre Dame. They couldn't do that because the rule last year, it wasn't a Notre Dame can't play. It wasn't a rule that said Notre Dame can't get a bye. It was you have to win your conference to get a bye. Therefore, Notre Dame can't get in. It wasn't Notre Dame rule 13.A. Notre Dame can't get a bye. Notre Dame not getting a bye was a byproduct of the rule. That's why Ohio State couldn't get a bye. Let's just say hypothetically that Ohio State beats Michigan and goes 11-1. They'd have been ranked high. And let's just say the tiebreaker would have been such that Ohio State doesn't get into the Big Ten title game, or Purdue doesn't. Well, they couldn't get a bye either. Let's say Ohio State would have beaten Michigan. Penn State beats Oregon in the Big Ten title game. Now, all of a sudden, Oregon can't get a bye, right? There's all these different scenarios you could go down and say it was not a Notre Dame rule. So what a lot of people like Josh Payton and others are advocating for is there should now be a rule that only affects Notre Dame. Notre Dame being independent is not because of any exemptions in their favor, other than they're just better than you when it comes to the financial part of things. Not in football, but financially. They can survive on their own. They don't need you to survive. They want to now create a rule that only punishes Notre Dame and nobody else. It's like I said in a conversation I was having, it's like you want to create a rule saying that you can't get a bye if you don't play in your conference championship. Like, okay, fine. Because now you're saying basically, well, the SEC and the Big Ten champs are going to be in the top 4, but now there's a chance for their runners-up to be in the top 4. Okay, that's fine. Notre Dame would have applied to that, but so would Ohio State if they didn't make it in. So, if they were top 4 but didn't make the Big Ten title game. But you're not willing to make that rule. You want to now say, no. We're fine with there not being any rules for byes, just top 4 teams, except Notre Dame, because they're not in the conference. Now, I know they play 10 Power 4 teams this year, but they're not in the conference. Like, so what? What's the rule that Notre Dame is breaking? What's the exception that Notre Dame is using to not be in a league? There isn't one. They were never in a league. They tried multiple times to get into a league, and you rejected them. Big Ten, I'm looking at you. So that's the reality of it, Trevor, is they're very bad takes. There's the Notre Dame envy is on full display now because of the success that Notre Dame has had. And what have I always told you, Trev? You told me that you've been listening to IB from the beginning. What's the one thing I've always said? Teams down south especially are petrified of Notre Dame getting back to being a dominant program. Because they know once that can of worms gets opened up, it makes life a lot harder. they didn't think Notre Dame was going to engage in NIL because of some comments made by Father Jenkins. And now that Notre Dame is swinging kind of a big stick on the NIL stamp, they're upset. They're in their feelings about it. Notre Dame's just buying players. That's ironic coming from someone from Georgia. So that's what it all comes down to. There's envy of Notre Dame. There's fear of Notre Dame because they know we're going to start losing even more kids because now Notre Dame can buy players and they can put guys in the NFL. Notre Dame beat Georgia for 2 defensive ends from the South in this recruiting cycle, 26 recruiting cycle. Never happens. Maybe one, but not both. 5 years ago, 3 years ago. Doesn't happen. And it happens now. Why? Well, Marcus Freeman's part of that, and that's their fear. They got to do everything they can to tamp down Notre Dame's ability to compete for a championship. Well, you had that. You had that in the system that forced Notre Dame to play 4 games. You had that. But then you got upset that Boise and SMU and Boise and Arizona got buys, and then you blew the whole thing up after 1 year. Ignoring the fact that your number 1 and number 2 seeds both lost by double digits in their games. And there you go. And there you go.
Mm-hmm. And I think where Notre Dame is starting to gain some national respect. I've seen some clips, just various podcasts out there. And one of the things that I'm starting to see is if they did make such a rule that was Notre Dame specific, I guess technically if they wanted to try to say it's also for the other independent teams, okay, it's for Notre Dame.
Right.
That they couldn't still receive a bye. At the top, I think Notre Dame was like, all right, cool.
No, I disagree. And
I'm talking the team, like not Pete Bravacqua. I'm saying,
oh yes, like Marcus Freeman,
like Marcus. Yeah.
Yeah, he wouldn't care.
Yeah, he'd be like, okay.
And I don't think, in theory, Pete Bravacqua would have a problem with having to be in a bye. I think the issue that Pete would have would be we can't allow them to set a precedent that they can set anti-Notre Dame rules.
Sure. Yeah.
And that's what his pushback would have been. But they never. I mean, as a matter of fact, Jack Swarbrick, from what I'm told, is one of the people that was very pro, conference championship buys because there's. I mean, no, he's a businessman too. These people, they know what hosting a playoff game does for Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm.
They also wanted to eliminate some of the you don't play in the conference crybaby stuff that they knew was eventually going to come. You guys blew the system up. Notre Dame didn't. That's why I was so disappointed in Josh saying like Notre Dame pushed for this. You're a smart guy. You know exactly why Notre Dame advocated for not being held out of the top 4 because you know that you can't allow a precedent to be set of anti-Notre Dame rules because that's the door that gets opened up that they will eventually use to force Notre Dame into a conference. Because they can say, well, hey, we set this rule. Well, now we're just going to keep them out of the playoff entirely. Pete Bavacqua had to put his foot down immediately and say, nope, that ain't happening. Why? Because you can't allow that. You can't allow that precedent to be set. Because again, last year was not an anti-Notre Dame rule. Last year that was true for everybody. It was a rule that impacted everybody that didn't win a conference championship. It impacted Georgia and Texas. The loser of that game was going to be impacted by that rule. Penn State, Oregon, Ohio State, 2 of those teams are going to be impacted by that rule. So that's why he pushed back. To your point, to the football team, I've said before, I'd prefer a bye. I made this very case last week. I don't think it's great that Notre Dame gets a bye because now if you face the loser of a conference championship game in the quarterfinals, that means that team has played 2 games since your last game. That's not a good thing for Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. Absolutely. But that's what I continue to respect about like Marcus Freeman and specifically the football program itself is he's not going to have a James Franklin moment where he talks about how everybody should play in a conference. He's not going to have a Kalen DeBoer moment talking about what would happen if you played our schedule. Like it wouldn't be any of that.
They'd have beat
Notre Dame receives a bye.
That's what they would have done.
Yeah. If Notre Dame receives a bye, it's okay. There's prep we have to do. We haven't played a football game since November 22nd.
Mm-hmm.
That'd be the conversation around it. If they don't receive a bye, it's like we love hosting. We love the opportunity to host another college football playoff game. Even if they have to travel, it's like Haven't got to play in the stadium since X amount of year, whatever. It's going to be a great opportunity. It's not going to be well, look, we're at a disadvantage and yada, yada, yada. Big Ten kept us out of their conference for years, and now we're suffering the repercussions of it. No, they would just, okay, because they handle business. That's my biggest common theme and takeaway from this show and from everything that's just happened is the teams that just kind of roll up their sleeves and go out and handle business. That's fine. They'll go out and do what they got to do.
Right.
The teams that won't will come up with every excuse under the sun as to why it didn't happen. Right. With every excuse under the sun, except for self-reflection, saying we probably just should have beaten a pair of 6-6 and a 4-18.
What has Steve Sarkisian's comments about all this been? Is he crying about it? No, he's not. Is he crying about the draw last year? No, he's not. He has said that he doesn't think a team's going to go undefeated again, which makes sense. I made that case last year. But they got beat because why? They got whooped. They got their butts whooped in the trenches in every game they lost. So what did Steve Sarkisian do this offseason? He only got like 8 defensive tackles out of the portal. Because he looked in the mirror and said, that's why we lost. Now, I don't know if what he did is going to fix the problem, but he took steps to fix it. No crying about, well, it wasn't fair that a team like Ohio State, this, that, and the other thing. No crying from Steve Sarkisian, none. He went out there and said, look, we weren't good enough here. That's why we got beat. So we're going to go out there and get better.
Mm-hmm.
And let's take steps to get better. And props to him for doing that. But, yeah. So, no, I don't think the Big 12 – I think the Big 12 is the one that's saying, hey, we're gonna put up a little bit more of a fight. Notre Dame certainly is. I don't think the ACC is in a position to do that. And I don't think they have the leader to do that. It's kind of like I was watching The Godfather last week. The ACC does not have a wartime consigliere. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like they've got a peacetime consigliere. That they've got a peacetime commissioner.
Yeah.
They don't have a wartime commissioner. Jim Phillips is not a wartime commissioner. And that's why the ACC is getting steamrolled.
Mm-hmm.
It really is. Because he can't even keep his own league together. You know, the Big 12's out there trying to raid from the ACC, talking about maybe taking some of the teams if they jump in kind of thing. So I think if Notre Dame's going to have an ally in the fight against the SEC and the Big 10, it's going to be the Big 12, not the ACC.
Agreed.
There might be some individual teams in the ACC that kind of step up to the plate, but the league as a whole, I just don't think I haven't seen anything from Jim Phillips in his career that makes me think this guy has what it takes to go toe-to-toe with the Big Ten and the ACC commissioners. The league can't go toe-to-toe. It's a different – but I mean, like, as a commissioner, not using the things that you have at your disposal, just kind of taking those L's. I don't think it's Brett Yormark. Isn't that the name of the Big 12 commish?
I think so.
He seems to me as someone who's got a little bit more something to him.
Sure.
You know, and then, of course, we know Pete Bavacqua does. So, yeah, that was my take on that. But at the end of the day, I don't know that they had much of a choice. For all I know, they did fight, and the Big Ten and the SEC called their bluff.
No.
So, but at the end of the day, I thought that the bye system worked in a 12-team playoff. It was going to go away in a year anyway. So, eventually it was going to – I mean, you weren't going to have a bye system in a 16-team playoff, which is always what it was going to get to.
Absolutely. Well, that's going to do it for the first segment of today's show, recapping the ongoing college football playoff debate that is currently happening right now. Don't go anywhere, folks. We're getting ready to start breaking down Notre Dame more specifically around just continual preseason rankings. We're getting ready to talk Marcus Freeman coming up next. But before we get there, folks, be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. Share this podcast with your friends and family, anybody that you know loves Notre Dame and college football as much as you do. But as always, the best way to support what we do here at Irish Breakdown is subscribe to the premium message board. You see it scrolling down there at the bottom of your screen, boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, Brian, in part 2 of today's show, we are going to talk about Notre Dame's head coach, Marcus Freeman, relative to where he's at in some of these post-fall rankings, continuing the preseason talk here. And there's several outlets that talk about all the coaches, top 10 coaches are putting out their different lists about, who ranks where in returning to college football. And Marcus Freeman has consistently found himself in like the top 7 or 8. And there's a couple of key rankings that we want to talk about today: Sporting News, CBS Sports, ESPN. But when you start talking about Marcus Freeman and his quick rise to fame in college football, my biggest takeaway initially is, one, it's about time that a Notre Dame head coach is kind of getting the respect that they deserve in this light. And I'm happy that it's Marcus Freeman that's earning this right to be in these.
It's funny you say that, because I actually always, for a while there, I felt like Brian Kelly got a little bit too much credit for a while, but we don't need to go down that road again. But, it is interesting to see where Marcus Freeman was ranked last year compared to this year, because going into last season, there was a understandable constant push of he's got to show me something. So like when you look at the Sporting News rankings, for example, they had Marcus Freeman ranked 22nd a year ago. I probably would have had him a touch higher, but you lost to Marshall. You lost at home. You lost at home to Ohio State. You lost to Clemson. You got smacked by Louisville. You didn't deserve to be in that category. And then you have the year that you have, and you jump up to 4. And what Bill, here's what Bill had to say about it. And you guys know Bill Bender. He also hosts a weekly show on CFB Nation. He says Freeman makes a huge jump after leading the Irish to the CFB championship game in 2024, and we are not second-guessing this call. Freeman has delivered 24 wins in the last 2 seasons, and the bounce back from the Week 2 loss to Northern Illinois last season showed the ability to hold a team together. The Irish were 7-1 against top 25 teams last season, with the lone loss coming to the Buckeyes. And then the 3 coaches he had ahead of him was Dabo, Ryan Day, and Kirby Smart, which is exactly who should be ahead of him. And I had no issue with those top 3. I had no issue with Kirby being number 1. I still think there's part of me that still thinks Dabo should be considered number 1, depending on how far back we want to go. Because to have Dabo 3, you're clearly still viewing his championships as part of this conversation. Well, I'd still say his run, Georgia got into the playoff or the championship 3 times under Kirby, and there was a period where I think Clemson made it 15, 16, 18, 19, like 4 out of 5 years they were in the championship game. Not even in the playoffs, just in the championship game. So, but I'm fine with Kirby being there at number 1. I am. I mean, when you're down years 11-3 and you win the SEC championship, you're a pretty good football coach. And that's the year that everybody's bummed about. I was fine with Ryan Day winning number 2. Guy's got a great record, and last year he kind of exercised a lot of those demons that kind of kept them from maybe that made me say maybe he's a little overrated last year. But he hit his own home run last year. He wasn't born on. If anything, the loss to Michigan kind of knocked him back to home. Back to the batter's box, and he had to go at it again, and he hit a home run. So I was fine with that, but you're starting to see some of the recognition. The other thing, too, is if you look at Bill's rankings of Sporting News, the top 25 rankings, what's even more impressive is that Marcus Freeman and Notre Dame had to face a lot of those teams last year. So obviously they lost a number 2 ranked coach in the championship game, beat the number 1 ranked coach in the quarterfinals, beat the number 8 ranked coach in the semifinals, beat the number 12 coach, Lincoln Riley, at his place, and then beat the number 15 coach at home in the regular season. And then also in the first round of the playoff had to play Kurt Cignetti, who's ranked number 16 or 17. I would argue that Kurt Cignetti needs to be a little bit higher for what he did at JMU and Indiana. Okay, different conversation for a different day. But you went 5-1 so like there's 25 coaches in the ranking. You take out Marcus Freeman, that means there's 24 that aren't him. You face 6 of them. That's 25% of the teams with the coach top 20. You played and you went 5-1. I think that's the reason that Marcus Freeman jumped up, not just because Notre Dame made it to the title game, but it's that they made it to the title game and who they had to knock off to get there. Jeff Brom, Lincoln Riley on the road, Kurt Cignetti, Kirby Smart, James Franklin. It was okay, yeah, this is an issue, this thing. And you saw in the ESPN rankings, they had Marcus Freeman 4th there as well. They had an interesting comment from someone who was pro Marcus Freeman and someone who was not anti Marcus Freeman. I shouldn't say that. That's not fair to he had Marcus Freeman outside of his top 10, which is a bit silly, but I don't think he's like anti Marcus Freeman. I just think it was a bad analysis. But he talked about, some of the in-game blunders, the 10 guys in the field against Ohio State, 23, and losing to Marshall, losing to Stanford, losing to Northern Illinois. I totally get that. I would understand that if that's something that caused someone to not have him in the top 5 just yet. I think the reason why I'm not sympathetic to those arguments is because there's nobody else that has a better argument now. Sark doesn't, Lanning doesn't, and there's just not that same level of proven coaches in the league now where there was 5 years ago when that's been 6 years ago when you still had Saban, you still had Urban Meyer, you had Dabo doing his thing, you had Jim Harbaugh still in the sport, you had David Shaw still in the sport. A lot of those coaches are gone now, and we're seeing this next era step in, and Marcus Freeman is the one that kind of jumped to the front of the line of that group this offseason by the success that they had, not just as a record, but the head-to-head success against those teams. Because if you actually look at it, of the 5 teams they beat, 3 of them were by double digits. They beat USC by 15 or 14. They beat Indiana by 10 in a game that was a 27-3 game with a minute and a half left in the game. And then you also beat Georgia by 13 in a game where you led by double digits from the end of the second quarter on. Georgia never got it within single digits the race after, because you scored with seconds left in the second quarter, make it 13-3. Georgia never got within less than 10 points. So it was 20-10, right? And then Notre Dame got in field goal. It was the way that they won some of those things, where now it's like, okay, it's time to put some of those things behind us when it comes to a ranking standpoint. Now, I would argue that Marcus Freeman still has things to prove this season. Avoid that Northern Illinois type of loss, avoid some of these, but you've got to look at it and say, okay, 13 wins in a row, beating Riley, beating Brom, beating Signetti, beating Kirby, beating Franklin. And I would argue there's a coach that okay. There's a coach not on this list that I think flat out needs to be on this list. And I'm wondering if this is just was this just a Power 4 ranking? Because I'm sorry, Jeff Monken deserves to be on this list. That's another top coach, well-respected coach that Notre Dame beat last year. I would argue that Mike Elko has a better case to be made than Mario Cristobal does and Rhett Lashley does, if you look for the entirety of their careers. But that's the thing, is you had to go toe-to-toe with some other good coaches and you beat them. And that was a big key for me, why I'm comfortable with Marcus Freeman being number 4, even though I do believe he has some things he has to prove this year.
Yeah, when you look ahead in the rankings and you see who's ranked ahead of him, I get it. There's 3 active coaches right now in college football coaching at the Division I FBS level that have national championships in that level, and it's the 3 ranked ahead of him. I have no pushback with that at all. Where I'm happy with some of these lists as well is a lot of pre-spring rankings. It was talking about they would rank Marcus Freeman high, but not for the reasons that he should have been. It was more of, he did so much more with less.
Yeah, you get that vibe from a lot of people, yeah.
And now some of these rankings are coming out saying no, this is just a really good program. They're ascending, they're moving in the right direction, and he's kind of at the helm of that. There is still a little bit of, Marcus Freeman is the 4th best coach because guys, look what he's doing at a place like Notre Dame. And it's okay, well, Marcus Freeman is kind of changing the narrative of what it means to play at a place like Notre Dame. But it is slowly starting to fade further and further under the rearview mirror about what he's actually done to turn this program around, continuing to elevate the facilities and the athletes that they're bringing in, the portal players that they're attracting. I mean, it's no mystery that this past season, after the success that they had, they got one of the top wide receivers from the ACC, a receiver from Wisconsin, a defensive player, 12-game starter from Alabama. They got, an ACC defensive lineman, very productive. They got a defensive lineman from USC. It's not too long ago that it's like, yeah, Notre Dame brought in a transfer portal defensive lineman from Harvard and a wide receiver from Northwestern. And it's like, yeah, that's a Notre Dame transfer portal class. You know what I mean? And now it's okay. They're starting to change who they're attracting. And so all of that kind of buck stops with the head coach. And that's just another impact that he's having.
I do get a sense in a lot of these breakdowns, Trev, that there still is some of he gets a bump because they don't think Notre Dame has the same kind of roster as other people.
Sure.
I do think there's something to that. I do still get the sense when you read things that like, boy, just, man, to take that Notre Dame team all the way to the title game is like, we watch different games because I've said this before, and anyone watching the Notre Dame Georgia game with an open mind is going to come away saying they have a fast guy here and there, but you're not going to tell me that that's a more athletic team than Notre Dame. At the very least, it's equally as athletic. I don't even know that I agree with that. You can't watch some of these teams and say, boy, that team's roster is just way better than Notre Dame's, except for one. And that's the team that beat them last year in the championship game. Well, Notre Dame's got a lot more coming back from that team than Ohio State does. That doesn't mean that they're going to be better than Ohio State because you're 0 for 3 against Ohio State. The point being, I still get a sense when I read these that there's still a level of, wow, he's overachieving a little bit. Like he's getting some like minor Lance Leopold type of love. Like, look what he's doing with the roster that's not as good as the other teams. Imagine if he could recruit like so-and-so, as opposed to he should still get that love, but it's not just because he can build a team. Like I thought Bill's comment was like being able to hold that team together and have them rebound the way they did from that loss speaks a lot about the kind of coach he is, because a lot of teams would have buckled after that. Look at all the issues Alabama had within that program after that, during and after that Vanderbilt loss. There's a reason that they just choked a game away at Oklahoma, because he couldn't keep that locker room together. Marcus Freeman did. But I don't think enough is being given to, like, have you seen the kind of players this cat's bringing into that when you read stuff from coaches, you see that. And we'll talk about that in the Athlon section. But I still think from a media standpoint, there's still a lot of people that don't think this team is as good as it actually is, talent-wise. But I that doesn't mean that Freeman should be ranked lower. It just means the narrative should be a little bit different, because I think he's responsible for bringing in that talent, and you should be credited for that, like Dan Lanning gets credited for that. But that's been a little bit of a takeaway for me. Trev, did you have any issue with the top three? I know we're both on the same page of who they are, but were you also okay with the order?
The order, depending on how far back you want to go, it kind of goes back to the conversation
let's say you go back 7 years. We'll go back to Dabo's last title.
Okay. Then yeah, I mean, I'm okay with the ranking. Honestly, I think there's an argument to be made that 1, 2, and 3 can be interchangeable, because I think they all have a case to be at any one of the three spots. Is how I look at it. With Ohio State, they're the most recent champion winners. They were the first, Ryan Day's record against AP opponents, against ranked opponents, his overall record. They just won the national title. Okay, fair, recency. Kirby Smart put together back-to-back title wins, and they were something like 29-1 during that stretch, won back-to-back titles. I think they're the only team that's gone back-to-back in the playoff era. Is that right?
Georgia?
So,
yeah. Because Ohio State won, then Bama, then Clemson, then Bama, then Clemson, then LSU, then Alabama, and then Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State.
Yeah. So only team that's gone back-to-back in the playoff era. Fair enough.
One of only three teams to win multiples in that decade. Bama won 3, Clemson won 2, Georgia won 2.
And, we talked about it earlier in the show. It's, they're down year. They're 11-3, winning the SEC. Like that's a darn good coaching job, man.
Against a legitimately brutal schedule.
Yes. And so the argument for him to be at any one of the 1, 2, and 3, and then Dabo, of course, like, again, a lot of people counted him out. People thought that, hey, is this kind of the end of Dabo Swinney? Did he have his great run from 15 to 20, and then it's kind of And he rebounded by making the first 12-team college football playoff and still winning the ACC. And then you compound that with, the amount of titles that they won. Sure, I'm perfectly fine with the top three, honestly. And then for me specifically, like in any order.
The placement of Brian Kelly 9 makes Dabo at 3 make more sense. Being in the top 3 makes more sense. However, by putting Brian Kelly 9, I think you could also argue that Dabo should be higher. He should be at least 2, if not 1.
Sure.
And the reason I say that is because everything that Bill talks about having Brian Kelly 9 looks at the entirety of his career. And if you look at the entirety of his career, I totally understand Brian Kelly being a top 10 coach. Did a great job at Central Michigan, rebuilding that program, won 10 games, 9, and they won a bowl game after he left. Did a great job completely turning around Cincinnati. Had Notre Dame in the, playing for a championship 3 times, once in the BCS era, twice in the college football playoff, and won double-digit games and was it 18, 19, 20 in his last 4 years. Won a Heisman Trophy, played in the SEC championship. So I'm okay with that. But if you're going to look in the entirety of your career, then I think you need to absolutely have Dabo ahead of Ryan Day. Well, they're 1-1 against each other, right? I mean, Dabo's got more titles. You say, most recently. Okay, then if we're going to do most recently, then let's again drop down Brian Kelly. If we're going to talk about most recent, that was one of my nitpicks with Bill, and I also think he has Lane Kiffin a little bit too high.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And where was Lincoln Riley? 13th. I mean, 12th. If you're going to 12th, I mean, if you're going to go based on recency, any coach that has regressed year over year over year in his previous at his most recent stop, in my opinion, shouldn't be anywhere close to the top 10.
Right. I mean, if you're going to include their entire careers, with all due respect, Lincoln Riley should be ahead of Josh Heupel. And I think you can make a case he should be ahead of Lane Kiffin if we're going to talk about the entirety of careers. I thought Kyle Whittingham was a little low for my taste. I thought Jeff Brom was a little low at 15, but I get that one. A guy that Bill Belichick being there at 18, I thought I get why you're doing it, but no. Guy's never coached a game in college football. Like, he's got to prove it first, in my opinion. But I guess I get it because it is Bill Belichick. It's a guy that's won, 7 Super Bowls. I kind of got that a little bit. But, yeah, those are some of the guys that I thought were a little bit undervalued for my liking. But overall, I didn't have any huge issues with the list. I have a feeling that Bill only looked at Power 4 coaches because, again, I don't know how you don't have Jeff Monken in that list. If you're talking about, like, how is Mario Cristobal and Brett Bielema? I mean, Brett Bielema's been solid at Illinois. He was terrible at Arkansas. How is he in the top 25 over Lance Leopold? I mean, we're going to talk the entirety of their careers. I mean, do we remember what that guy did at Buffalo? Do we remember what he did at Wisconsin Whitewater? I mean, Kansas has been 2 bowl games under him? So most of my issues were more in the bottom half, but none that I was like egregious, like, Bill, what are you thinking? You're nuts for that one. I just would say, if you're going to rank Brian Kelly 9th for his entirety of his career, I'm fine with, then you've got to have Dabo higher than 3rd.
Sure. Agreed. I'm with you there.
I'll be honest, I was surprised because ESPN and CBS Sports, Sporting News, both had Notre Dame, had Freeman 4th, ahead of Sark and Dan Lanning. That's a change from what we had seen from previous rankings of people that had both of those guys ahead of Marcus Freeman. We saw CBS Sports release their top ranking, and they had Marcus Freeman 6th behind both Lanning and Sarkisian. That list was put together by Tom Fornelli. I still just don't quite understand how someone could make a case that those 2 coaches need to be ahead of Marcus Freeman. And I point out again that Steve Sarkisian's been a head coach for over a decade at big schools, Washington, USC, and Texas. And he has the same number of 10-win seasons as Marcus Freeman does, 2. And Marcus Freeman has more playoff wins than than Steve Sarkisian, who is 2-2 in the playoffs. Marcus Freeman's 3-1 because he lost a game last year. And my whole thing is I don't understand how you can. There's no case to be made. I don't care that Alabama didn't do a good job last year. There is no case to be made for Kalen DeBoer to be below Dan Lanning. He literally went 3-0 against Dan Lanning in 2022 and 2023. What did Dan Lanning do this season? He beat Ryan Day at home by a point. Okay. What's your point? And Kalen DeBoer beat Sark. Kalen DeBoer beat Kirby this year. This year at Bama, beat Kirby. So that one with Kalen DeBoer, it's like that one I don't get. So we're just going to look at what he did at Bama and have that trump what he did at other places. But with Brian Kelly, we're going to hype up what he did at past places to have him in the top 10. That I have a little bit of an issue with. Now that's what I liked about Bill's ranking. Bill actually had Kalen DeBoer ahead of Dan Lanning. Now, I would have argued that Kalen DeBoer also belongs ahead of Sarkisian. Because, again, what has Kalen DeBoer done that Sark has never done? Played for the title. And they also went head-to-head in 2023, and Kalen DeBoer beat him.
Yeah.
Look, I get the 9-4 season this year was disappointing, but both of them, at least Sark has some plenty of years where you're like, dude, that was not a very good team. Lanning has at least been really good. His teams have been really good. I'll give him that. But I also want to point out that their record in big postseason games and out of conference has not been good. And they did lose to Georgia in his first year in 2022, 49-3. They did get destroyed. Yeah, they beat Ohio State in the regular season. Well, what happened when it really mattered? They got annihilated. What did he do every time he played Kalen DeBoer with Pac-12 title on the line? Got outcoached both times. So Dan Lanning's got a lot to prove to me. Very good coach, top 10 coach for sure. But is he better than Sark and Kalen DeBoer? No. Fortunately, Bill is one person that did have that. ESPN had Sark 4 or Sark 5, Lanning 6, and then they had Kalen DeBoer 7.
Hmm.
Yeah, and Andrea Adelson did not have him in the top 10. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. Who did you say didn't have him in the top 10?
Andrea Adelson. So on the ESPN top 10, and I actually thought this was really cool, the way they did this. They would have a quote from whoever had him on that coach the highest, and then they would have a quote from someone who had him the lowest of all the different coaches. Well, I actually thought it was pretty cool to kind of give you some insight into what I liked about that article, and it's showing love to ESPN, was the ranking was comprised of all their college football writers voted. And so the rankings were put together not just by one guy, Mark Schlaball putting a rank together, or Chris Lowe putting a ranking together. It was or Andrea Adelson putting a ranking together. It was all of them came up with their own rankings and they voted on it, and that's how it shaped up. But what I liked about it, the actual article, is that you did have those quotes from two different types of people. And, what she said is basically, what does he need to do to win you over? And she says, make the playoffs this year. His career at NAIA and FCS levels and what he did in his short period at Washington are super impressive. Don't get me wrong. But I thought Jalen Milroe regressed under DeBoer last season and the team did not play consistently. Yes, I understand it's always hard to replace a legend as the DeBoer did at Saban, but Alabama is a place ready-made to win now. But I thought all you guys said Alabama deserved to be in the playoff last year because of how hard their schedule was. Y'all need to pick a lane. But that's my thing is look, I know that but why are you using that year to trump what he did at other places? You can't just ignore what he did at Washington as if it's no big deal. That to me, I had a bit of an issue with that. I'm not gonna, yeah. She also had Ryan Day at number 4. So I was like, okay, that's interesting. I don't have a huge problem with that, but she had Brian Kelly in his top 10. So called him a consistent winner, no matter where he has coached. Well, hold on a second. You just let one bad season for Kalen DeBoer trump what he did everywhere else. Well, didn't Kalen DeBoer coach against Brian Kelly this year? Did Jalen Milroe look like he regressed in that game? They destroyed LSU this past year. So how are you going to have Brian Kelly in your top 10 for consistency, but then you're going to you're going to talk about Kalen DeBoer's not in your top 10 because he went 9-4 at Alabama? What was LSU's record last year? 9-4. What was the score of the Alabama LSU game? Was it like 42-14 or something or 49, something like that? What was the score of that game? It was not close. It was not close. It was 42-13.
Real quick, just to backtrack for a second, with Ryan Day at 4, what were the 3 coaches that were ahead of him? Day or
she didn't give that. So I don't know. It's just like it's their quotes. They don't have each of the people's like individual rankings. They just talked about like she was asked. She was the one that wrote the negative thing for Ryan Day, and she has her explanation for it. She says there are a couple reasons I did not take Day higher. I think he should have docked for having a poor record against Michigan. The most important game on the schedule every year. Apparently that's more important than the title game. He's 1-4 against the Wolverines and lost last season as a prohibitive favorite. The corresponding outrage from the fan base only died down after Ohio State won the national championship. Like that's just some sort of like consolation prize. That leads me to my second point. You might be thinking the national title is reason enough to have Dave ranked higher, but in any other season, that Michigan loss would have ended the Buckeye season. They got a second chance only because the newly expanded 12-team playoff. For those reasons, I have Day number 4. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard of.
Yeah. I'm just trying to figure out who are the 3 other coaches she would put ahead. Like, I get Smart and Dabo. Who would be the other person?
Yeah, they don't have her in any of the and
I'm not you guys know I'm not a Ryan Day sympathizer, and I'm not screaming, right. But just looking at it objectively, I don't know who it can't be.
Like 1-4 versus Michigan's not good.
No.
But you also can't ignore the fact that he's beaten James Franklin every time they've played. You can't ignore the fact that he was in the playoff in 2019. He made it to the title game in 2020. He was in the playoff game. He was in the playoffs again in 2022. He was in the playoffs again in 2024, and they won a national championship. And yeah, 23 was disappointing and 21 was disappointing in that, but that's the standard at Ohio State. You're supposed to get the championship game.
Yeah.
But who's done more than that?
Yeah,
I'd be very curious to see who she had ahead of him.
Like I'm running through the names, and I got nobody, man. I mean, he's 3-0 against Marcus Freeman, owns James Franklin. I have no idea who else could possibly be. I don't know. That's an interesting thought. But yeah, overall, I'm with you. I think Kalen DeBoer deserves to be higher. The conversation around those 4, Freeman, DeBoer, Lanning, and Sark, is very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's one that I think over the next 2 seasons, between 25 and 26, I think that conversation will start to get a little bit more clear. Because if Marcus Freeman can perennially get Notre Dame back to the semifinals or the national championship, and then if Lanning continues to be hey, we're 11-1 in the regular season, but yeah, dude, but if you get bounced in the first round of the playoffs every year, you kind of start to get that reputation. For Sark, it's like, hey, can you finally put it together? Mm-hmm. We heard nothing about your roster all last season, and Quinn Ewers is this, and on defense you got Jadae Barron and Andrew Makuba and all these guys, and you got Kelvin Banks on the O-line, and we're getting ready to talk about what Texas is being thought of in this preseason once again. Hey, can you put it together? Can you win the SEC? Can you make it back to the national title game? Who knows? And so I think over the next 2 seasons, that conversation between those 4 specifically will get really clear. If Alabama is able to put it together like you and I think that they can, I'm going to be interested to see how the conversation and narrative around him changes, because it changed very quickly for Marcus Freeman. Will it change that quickly for Kalen DeBoer, or will it get looked at in a different lens because you're Bama?
Right.
I'm be interested to see how that unfolds.
I think the fact that they have him like 6 or 7, I think they're waiting on him to do that.
Yeah.
So, I I would imagine they would bump him way. Like, I think if Marcus Freeman and Kalen DeBoer both get to the semifinals this year, both lose it, you don't be shocked if next year they put Kalen DeBoer ahead of Marcus Freeman.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I'm not even saying that that's a bad thing because he also led a team to the championship game. I'm not even saying that is wrong. He's got a much longer track record than Marcus Freeman does. And in 2 of the last 3 years, his team at Washington was better than Freeman's team at Notre Dame. He inherited a team at Washington, went 4-8.
Yeah.
You can't act like, well, look, in defense of Coach Freeman, Kalen DeBoer walked into a much better situation. No, he didn't. I've said before that I think the situation Marcus Freeman walked into is not as good as people think it is, but it still was good. Kalen DeBoer walked into a 4-8 situation. There were some good young players there, but he had to go to the portal, get a quarterback, do all these other type of things, and completely change the culture of that program. And he did that in a hurry. Went in 12-2 in year one, and then was it 14-1, 15-1 in year two, something like that, right? Played for the title. So yeah, I could see that. I could see that. The one that gets me, and we'll talk more about it, is the Sarkisian stuff. And I'm torn on it, Trev, because I'm actually I'm actually a Steve Sarkisian supporter. Like, I think he's a really good football coach. And I think had he not gone through some of the personal struggles he did at USC, he would have done a very good job there. I think he'd probably still be there. I don't say that. I think he'd be in the NFL as a head coach right now if it wasn't for the personal issues he went to. And I don't use those lightly. I mean, I feel for him to a degree for what he went through with, personal family issues leading to him having a drinking problem and basically kind of half hitting rock bottom a little bit. And I respect the fact that he's battled as hard as he has to get his life in order. And I truly admire that. And I think he's a heck of a football coach. And I think he's a brilliant offensive mind. I just feel like there's a lot of benefit of the doubt he gets for things he has yet to prove. He's done a great job at Texas. But it's like there's too much love thrown to Texas, in my opinion, and too many assumptions about what he's going to do at Texas that's not earned. That's not based on what he's done on the football field. Name me one team last year that Texas played that had a comparable roster that they beat.
I mean, none on an even playing field. The closest one to me, like just names of the roster, would be like a Clemson, but they were so young
Right.
that it's just not. Yeah. It's not equivalent. But yeah,
it's not A&M. It's not Michigan. No. They played 2 teams that had a comparable roster, and they went 0-3 against those 2 teams. Lost to Tech, and honestly weren't competitive in one of those games at home against Georgia. None of those games were played on the road. One was at home, 2 more at neutral field. Neutral sites. I think Sark also still gets a ton of credit for what he did at Bama as the OC. Agreed. And beating Bama in 2023. I think he gets a lot of credit for that still. More than I think he really should. Now, I think he's a top 10 coach easily, and I don't even necessarily I actually don't have a problem with like where Bill Bender had. Bill had him 5. I'm totally fine with that. I don't know that he's necessarily earned the right. I mean, I'd probably have him 6. I'd have Kalen DeBoer and Marcus Freeman both ahead of him. But I'm fine if you want to put him at 5. I'd even be fine if somebody wanted to put him ahead of Freeman. I wouldn't, but I wouldn't lose my mind over it. It's more so like the assumption that he's done something that he hasn't, where his mistakes get glossed over. But with Ryan Day, with Marcus Freeman, with Kalen DeBoer, they're overemphasized and over-exaggerated, and I don't quite understand that. Like, is Ryan Day being 1-4 against Michigan and losing? I'd be willing to bet you a steak dinner that if we saw Andrea Adelson's list, and I like Andrea, she does a nice job. I would be willing to bet you that it's Kirby, it's Dabo, and it's Sark ahead of Ryan Day. I'd be willing to bet. Now, again, Sark, who else? I don't know who else it could be. Sark's the only one that makes any sense. So, I don't
I think Sark is also helped out by the brand that he's coaching behind. Like, I don't want to take away from what he's done at Texas, but you got to think. I mean, Texas was back with Charlie Strong, Texas was back with Tom Herman, and now Texas is back again with Steve Sarkisian. Like, they're one of the only big brands that I've seen, like, nationally, people like want them to get back to like glory. Whereas some of the other brands that you brought up, like, people don't really want that for Bama in the masses because, like, they watched it happen for basically all of the 2000s, 20 teens, for obvious reasons. For obvious reasons.
Because I really like Kalen DeBoer, but I don't really necessarily want to see Bama being good again.
Same.
Because I'm kind of over it. I want to see somebody else.
Exactly. I mean, people didn't want Ohio State to return to what they were and win a national championship again for obvious reasons, and then same thing for Notre Dame. But Texas is one of the bigger brands that people are like, no, like, Texas is back now, baby. Like, horns up, Texas is back. And it's like, okay, like, I don't know what it is, Yeah, I don't know what it is with them, but I think Sark kind of benefits from that a little bit. That compounded with what he did as a coordinator under Nick Saban, and then was one of the few head coaches that got to add his name to the list of former assistants under Saban that beat him. And he did it in Tuscaloosa. Right. But for me,
and it was a great game. I mean, they played hard. Fantastic. They outplayed Bama for 4 quarters. I mean, it was a heck of a performance. There's no doubt about that.
Oh, it's the best game that Quinn Ewers played at Texas, in my opinion. I mean, he was excellent against Alabama that year. But when I think of Sark heading into this season, I think he starts to come on the verge of, is he going to elevate and become a championship contender every year, or is he going to fall into the James Franklin category? A lot of regular season wins, is always around the postseason conversation, but then it kind of, I do think that Texas is one of the teams that got helped out by a very soft road to the semifinals, having to play Arizona State and then having to play Clemson and then
blew a lead. Mm-hmm. Blew a lead in that game and needed overtime to beat them.
Yep. So this is going to be a pretty pivotal season for him, but all 4 coaches that we're talking about here, Freeman, DeBoer, Sark, and Lanning, are all going to start carving out what their legacies. They're going to start laying the groundwork for what that is. I'm not saying what they do in 2025 will define them for the rest of their coaching career.
But it makes movement. And I think all of them have a chance to crack into that top 3, depending on how the season goes. I'll also say this. I think there's a big drop-off after those 7 and everybody else. Yeah. And you could maybe make a case that James Franklin should be there. I don't. I think there's a perception about James Franklin about how his teams just always win that I don't think is true. And yes, the last few years at Penn State are pretty good. At 13-3 this year, 10-3, 11-2. But let's not forget that in 2021 they were 11-11. And let's not also forget that he's basically lost to every good coach he's faced. I mean, yeah, you and I praised them for how much more competitive they were against Ohio State and Oregon last year, and they battled their butts off against Notre Dame, but like literally we're praising the guy for his teams not getting whipped the way they did in the past. He still makes a lot of really questionable late game decisions. And the question goes back to, sure, they beat teams they're supposed to beat, but I asked the same question about James Franklin that I did about Sark. Who's the team that has had comparable talent to them that they've beaten? Harbaugh dominated them. Ryan Day's dominated them. Notre Dame beat them last year and didn't even play well. At least Sark can say, hey, we beat Bama 2 years ago in Tuscaloosa with Nick Saban there. Oh, fair. Fair. I beat Dabo in a playoff game. Fair. You did. What's James Franklin's claim to fame? I mean, what's his big win? Boise? SMU? Beating Memphis in the Cotton Bowl? Like some Penn State fans say, like, well, James Franklin's won a Cotton Bowl. And I'm like, he beat Memphis. You guys always cry about Notre Dame doesn't play a legit schedule, and then you want to hype up James Franklin for beating Memphis in the Cotton Bowl. Yeah, was a coach in one of the greatest bowl games I ever watched. I've said this, 2016 Rose Bowl was one of the greatest games I have ever watched, Trevor.
The game was nuts.
And Penn State played their butts off, but they lost. They lost. So I'll give him this. The one big game he won against a great coach in his third year. Let me look this up real quick. Third year, fourth year. Fourth year, they beat Washington and Chris Peterson in the Fiesta Bowl by a touchdown. That's a great win. Now, they had a better roster than Washington, but they still won, and it's still Chris Peterson. I'll give you that. That's it. That's what your whole career is built on right now. His record against top 10, top 15 teams is abysmal. So, so that's why I think there is a drop-off between – Dan Lanning has already won more big games than James Franklin. And it's a short list of big wins for him. Same with Sark. So that's why I do think there's still a drop-off between that group of four. Because, I'll argue against Sark and Lanning being ahead of Freeman. But I'm not going to be like, that's bull crap. I can't. No. I would have him here, but I'm not losing my mind over it. I'm not going to get fired up about it. Too fired up. I get fired up about a lot of things, but you know what I mean. I like the debate, but I'm not going to be like, dude, you're out of your mind for thinking that. There's one thing to make an argument for what you believe in, and there's another thing that you're like, dude, what you're saying right now is utter nonsense. I don't believe that to be true. I think that group of four is right there pushing to get in the top three, but I think there's separation between them and who's next. And I think James Franklin should be at the top of the group of who's next as far as the success he's had. You can't take that away from him. But I do think there's a drop-off between those four and him.
Yes. No, absolutely. And I think there's going to be more. I would make the argument that if Penn State especially, and I'm going to talk about this when we get into this Athlon Sports preview section here next, but I think James Franklin, with the roster that they have coming back and just the overall track record of the Big Ten the last 2 years and what they've done in the postseason, James Franklin is closer to falling away from that next group of four than to say what a potential Kurt Signetti is or a Kenny Dillingham is into moving into the group of the next people in.
Yeah.
Because at some point it kind of begs the question for Penn State, all right, dude, if not now, when? I'll get into more of it in the next section, but it is that is a healthy conversation to have with James Franklin. You've been at Penn State now for close to a decade, as crazy as that sounds. You're coming up on what is this?
Over a decade. This will be season 12.
Oh, wow.
His first year was 2014.
I don't know why I thought his first year was 2016.
15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21,
wow.
22, 23, 24, 25. This will be year 12.
Wow. So, yeah, I
think it's because a lot of people give him a pass for those first 2 years.
Okay.
Because he was still dealing with the sanctions and all that kind of stuff.
Gotcha.
I think that's why a lot of people really look at 2016 as when his program started to kind of ascend.
Gotcha.
I don't necessarily buy that because I think Bill O'Brien got them through the two toughest years of that period. But that's why I think a lot of people don't really look at his first 2 years as we're not going to count those.
I got you. Well, I think James Franklin is kind of on the brink of a if not now when type of thing. And they're going to get in that we're just going to be a consistent 10-11 win team purgatory, but not do much in the postseason type of deal. So, but yeah, I think there's some up and coming coaches that could move their way into that. I think they're closer to the next group in than James Franklin is into moving up the ranks of Marcus Freeman, Dan Lanning, Sark, and DeBoer. That's how I look at it. So, any final thoughts on this section, Brian?
No, it's going to be interesting, Trev, because what makes this conversation more fun than normal is that there are so many young coaches kind of.
Yeah.
We're entering in that next generation of coach. There's no more Saban. There's no more Urban Meyer. There's no more Harbaugh. He's in the NFL now. There's no more Mac Brown. You're in this era of, okay, there's Kirby and Dabo, but Kirby's been at Georgia less than what Franklin's been at Penn State.
That's crazy.
Dabo's been at Clemson forever. His first year there was
2010,
08, 09, something like that. When he took over as the interim.
Oh,
I think it was 08, 09. Maybe it was 08. Let me go look that up. Because remember, he replaced Tommy Bowden in the middle of the year, and they had some success, and then they decided to keep him. But yeah, that was 08. And then his first full year at Clemson was 2009. So he's been there for a while. But even then, that's not like super, super long when you think of what tenures for head coaches used to be like.
Sure.
But so you got those guys that have kind of been around for a little bit. But there's this era of, Freeman's 3 years. Sark's been at Texas longer than these other coaches have been at places. Lanning's going into year 4. DeBoer's going into year 2. Was last year a fluke year for Kenny Dillingham, or does he have Arizona State ready to roll? I think a lot of talent coming back. Can Lance Leopold bounce back? What's Kurt Signetti going to do for an encore? And I don't think he's getting enough respect, because it's not just about they played a weak schedule. Guys, it's Indiana. Any Big Ten team is not weak for Indiana. Like literally 100 years of football, 0 10-win seasons, and in year 1, Cat wins 11 games. We do the portal. What a bunch of group of 5 guys. I said it before the playoff. They're a group of 5 all-star team. Is what they were last year. When you look at all the guys at the transfer there's a bunch of guys from James Madison and Old Dominion and schools like that, And so I think he did a great job at James Madison. I think he should be higher, but this is a proven year for him. So I think there's this we're entering this really fun era where those young coaches, Lanning, Sark, Freeman, DeBoer's not young, but he's he's only going into year 4 of big time football. What does Heupel and Kiffin do? And guys like that were sort of the old guard, the Whittinghams and the Mike Gundys and the guys like that are kind of descending a little bit. They're older. Kirk Ferentz is a little older. Who are those guys that step into that spotlight and say, hey, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to make this climb. And so I'm looking forward to that. And I think that's one of the things that's fun. Then there's a couple old school coaches that are looking to reassert themselves. Brett Bielema at Illinois, is he going to be able to kind of get back to having the view people had of him at Wisconsin? And we'll see. So I think it's fun. That's why I really enjoy it, because I think coaching is so important in football. It's important in all sports, but especially football. And we're kind of entering that era of it's a new era of who are the stars going to be. Not just guys that have had a couple good years, but who are going to emerge. Who's the next Urban? Who's the next Saban? Who's the next, not 7 titles, but just, who's going to be that guy that establishes a powerhouse for a decade? And we're going to find that out, and it's going to be fun to watch. It really is.
Well, all right, folks, that's going to do it for part 2 of today's show, but don't go anywhere. We are going to wrap up today's show by talking about Athlon Sports preview for the 2025 college football season. But before we get there, please be sure to hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit that notification bell so whenever Irish Breakdown goes live. Whatever streaming platform that you listen to us on, whether it be Spotify podcasts or Apple podcasts, we would greatly appreciate a 5-star review. But as always, the best way to support what we do here, you see it scrolling down there at the bottom of your screen. Go check out the Champions Lounge on the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, Brian, to wrap up today's show, we are going to talk about the Athlon Sports preview for the 2025 college football season. And there is a lot to break down.
Yes.
Here.
Just want to be clear. Our website is affiliated. Irish Breakdowns, the free website, is affiliated with Athlon Sports. That's why I wrote the preview. We are not in any way, shape, form, or fashion obligated to talk about the preview magazine. We will do the same thing when Lindy's comes out. I had no bearing on who the top 25 teams were, who the best units were. The only thing I did is write the Notre Dame preview and give the 2 deep. So this is something we're doing just because it's fun. It's fun to do. It's something to talk about, and it's interesting to look at how much differently Notre Dame is viewed now than it has been in past years. And I even think in some ways they're still a little bit underrated. But in some of these magazines, you're starting to see more and more and more of there's people are slowly starting to figure out, like, maybe this team's a little bit more talented than we think. And I thought some of this stuff from Athlon made that clear to me.
Absolutely. Yeah. The narrative around Notre Dame is slowly starting to change. I think that's what makes the 2025 season such a big one for the Irish. Because look, the fact of the matter is that every season after they've made a postseason run, they follow that up the next year with an underwhelming season. And this is going to be a big year for Marcus Freeman and company, for Notre Dame to return back to the playoffs and make another run. But Athlon Sports, they're one of the sites that is really starting to bring up Notre Dame and talk about them like how we talk about them on the Irish Breakdown show, right? So for Athlon, they came out with their top 25. They had Notre Dame at 6th. And so when you look at these rankings as a whole, before we dive into Notre Dame specifically, what is your overall impression of these rankings as a whole, Bryan, from top to bottom?
Well, for Notre Dame, obviously, I think 6 is too low, but it's not one that I'm going to spend the next 20 minutes talking about. Like I've said it before. I think the fact that Notre Dame continues to be the 4th lowest ranked team of the 4 playoff teams shows that there is still a little bit of an underappreciation, or maybe, I don't say lack of respect, but more of I still think there's some doubt about how talented the team is. I think there is some of that out yet. But look, you've got Texas number 1. I don't agree, but I get it. You've got Penn State number 2. I have them 3, so I can't sit there and be like, you're nuts for having them 2. Ohio State's 3. I have Ohio State 1. So it's not just Notre Dame that I have a disagreement on. They've got Clemson 4 or Georgia 4 and Clemson 5. Again, I don't think Georgia has any business being ranked ahead of Notre Dame in the preseason rankings, but I also don't have it's not one where I'm going to look at and say, you're out of your minds. Like, there's talent coming back at Georgia. Is it as good as maybe it was when they won their titles? No, but it's still very good. You know, I have them, I think, 8th in our preseason top 20, or my preseason top 25. So that's not way off. And I understand it, because what 2 things that I can say that I'm very comfortable saying is, number 1, I said it all last year. I said it in the preseason. I said it during the season. I said it in the postseason when I predicted Notre Dame to beat Georgia. He said in the postgame show, I was hyped about them beating Georgia, but wasn't surprised. Notre Dame was a better team than Georgia in 2024. Georgia's still the better football program than Notre Dame. One great season doesn't all of a sudden mean you have ascended to where you're better than this other program, unless you're a team like Ohio State that goes out and wins a title. Then you can argue that, hey, we've ascended above another program. So you've got to string some seasons together where you're better than Georgia. So I don't have a problem with Notre Dame being ranked behind Georgia. And I think it's nuts to have Clemson ahead of Notre Dame for a lot of reasons, but I get it. And again, the last time these 2 teams played, Clemson won, and it was just 2023. So none of these rankings are so egregious where I feel like, man, Athlon's disrespecting Notre Dame. I think that there's still a level of, you don't quite understand how talented Notre Dame is, combined with a couple teams are getting overhyped. There's an assumption that Georgia's roster is built like it has in the past. What's interesting is some of the things that you and I have discussed about Georgia and Notre Dame and some other teams is so there's a segment that they do with each team where they talk about, they interview college football coaches, and they'll put them in there anonymously in comments they make. And it's this section right here about every team. You see it. And some of the stuff that you read about Georgia from in this magazine and others, they talk about the fact that this team isn't quite as talented as the teams they had won titles with. That's a true statement. This also still, without a doubt, a top 10 roster, like minimum top 10 roster. So none of those things, Trev, I had huge issues with. If I was going to sit here and pick apart the rankings, it's some of the stuff that comes after that. LSU at 7, ahead of Alabama, based on what? I mean, Alabama destroyed LSU last year. Oregon behind LSU. Like, I'm not the biggest Oregon fan in the world, but Oregon behind LSU, Miami at 10, Florida at 11. That's too high. K-State at 13, I like. They actually had K-State 13, Arizona State 14. I have Arizona State ahead, but as we've talked about, I'm not going to be shocked if K-State wins the Big 12 this year. Michigan 15 is way too high. Way too high, in my opinion. Indiana 16, Illinois 17, Ole Miss 18, A&M 19. I think that's a fair. I have A&M higher, but I understand. I'm fine with that ranking. 20, Oklahoma. Again, they have no business being in the top 25. 21 Tennessee, 22 Texas Tech. I don't get that one either. 23 Iowa State, 24 SMU, 25 Boise. I did find it interesting that 3 Notre Dame opponents are in their top 25. Miami at 10, A&M at 19, and Boise at 25.
Yeah, I mean, overall, for the top of the list, I wasn't necessarily upset about the order of the rankings. I was a little bit more off put by the defense of the rankings per se. There's a lot of emphasis on quarterback, a lot of emphasis at the top. And I think some of the frustrating things for me is not a lot is talked about for the defense on the defensive side of the ball for a lot of these teams. Notre Dame, there's no mention of any transfer portal players that come in for them. They talk about transfer portal players for Penn State, for Texas, for Ohio State, for Georgia, for LSU. It's like, they're bringing in all these guys. And for Notre Dame, it's like, well, if CJ Carr works out, then this is going to be a good team because they still have Jeremiah Love and Jadari Price. But they don't talk about Malachi Fields coming in. They don't talk about any of the other reinforcements that they got on offense or defense. So I thought that was a little bit interesting. But they talked about C.J. Donaldson for Ohio State. Okay, I guess, which whatever. But that was a little off-putting for me.
He's just kind of okay.
That's what I'm saying.
Like, if you want to talk about James Peoples being a breakout star, okay, cool. We can have that conversation. But, yeah, the C.J. Donaldson stuff I don't get.
Yeah, that was interesting for me. Up at the top, Texas at 1, fine. To me, that's just kind of a lot of people are just hopping on the Texas hype train and not looking at things objectively.
You know what it is, Trev? There's a lot. The magazines put way more magazines, ESPN, like recruiting services, like just college football analysts in general are putting a lot into teams that are building through the portal.
Oh, yeah.
Like they're putting a ton, which to me, it's like, did you pay attention to the last 2 years? Because the teams that have won the last 2 years, and when I mean won, I mean that were Final Four teams, have still been primarily built through high school recruiting and development. Mm-hmm. Texas had transfers in 23 and 24. Bama had transfers in 23. Michigan had some transfers in 23. So did Washington, obviously, their quarterback. And then this year, Penn State had a couple transfers, not many. Ohio State had some big name transfers, but volume very low. And Notre Dame had some important transfers, but volume very low. The portal is important, but they're hyping up teams that have completely rebuilt their rosters through the portal. Like I get the LSU overhype more than I get Oklahoma and Texas Tech.
Agreed.
Because with LSU, yes, you're relying on these two, big name receivers from, this school that were good players, but, not as good as people make them out to be. And there's this and there's that. But at the end of the day, you're still counting on Garrett Nussmeier's your quarterback, who's a returner, Caden Durham, who's coming back at running back. There's, Harold Perkins comes back at linebacker. I mean, there's still plenty of homegrown players that you're going to have in key positions that you hope can be successful. But again, they're relying heavily on the portal. Oklahoma, heavily on the portal. And yet they're not giving enough credit to the team who made the playoff with going into the portal, who's returning a bunch of their portal guys from last year in Indiana.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's interesting how they're putting so much into this, the teams that are completely rebuilding in the portal.
Yeah.
And it's a little puzzling, to be honest with. Like Texas Tech is you're going to really have in the top 25 over USC. You're going to really have Texas Tech in the top 25 over Georgia Tech and Navy and like even a bunch of other Big 12 teams.
Oh, yeah.
Like, did I see a BYU in there?
Nope.
You're going to have Texas Tech over BYU? Like that was the thing that was a little bit ahead. Y'all are really putting a lot on this transfer portal rebuild. And there's not a lot of evidence that there's a lot of teams that are having success with that, to be honest with you.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, again, the defense with Texas, like in the actual magazine, is like they highlight all of the concerns that we have voiced about Texas. But then that all just kind of gets brushed over. It's like, but they got Sark. And it's like, okay, but like based on what? Like, what has he done during his time at Texas to make you think that it's okay? I mean, they bring up stuff and they say, relying on a couple of transfer wide receivers. The offensive line will be under construction. There are a few question marks on defense. They have to replace major players at all three levels, but Sark's got it. They're the number one team.
Based on what? Exactly.
That's what I'm saying. It's like because they beat Bama that one time, that one game in Tuscaloosa 2 years ago.
Right.
Is that like really what we're putting all the focus into? If it is, then it is. But that's just what made that interesting for me. But the rest of the rankings.
One thing I like about Texas, though, Trev, is they're relying heavily on the portal, but there's a lot of homegrown players. Your backfield's homegrown, your quarterback and running back. Yes, you're getting some portal receivers, but you've got Wingo coming back. You got DeAndre Moore coming back. There's still a lot of Anthony Hill's a homegrown guy.
Yeah.
Eric Williams is a homegrown guy. So you almost kind of understand that overhype. They've been back-to-back Final Four teams, so this is the year they kick the door. I can live with that. I don't agree with it, but I have them number 4. We're not that far off. It's the LSU's, the Oklahomas, especially the Oklahomas and the Texas Techs. LSU, LSU can say last year was a down year for them, and they lost a couple really close games. All right, fair, fine, whatever. How's LSU and Alabama? How's LSU ahead of Alabama?
Yeah. Outside of the top 6 is where the majority of my issues lie to. You guys know by now, I don't see Miami being 10th. I just don't. I don't think they're there. I don't have them ranked in my top 25. I absolutely understand why some people would. I get that completely.
Come on, Miami.
10th is too high.
Agree.
I
think I have them 20th in mine. So I think they're better than you are, but 10's really high. But again, what are they banking on? Bunch of portal guys. Portal running back, although that's not a huge impact. Their top 2 running backs are guys that they had last year, but portal receivers, portal defensive linemen, portal linebackers, portal DBs. Entire secondary was built to the portal. And what's the track record that Mario Cristobal can build a top 10 team? That's part of my thing is what's the track record that Brian Kelly can build a top 10 team at LSU? He hasn't. He's literally not had a single one of his not the team that played for the SEC title game, not the team that had Jaden Daniels and Malik Neighbors and Bryant. None of those teams finished in the top 10, but yet we're going to put him in the top 10 preseason this year. That's kind of some of my things. But anyway, overall, but here's what I would defend it. It's consistent. All the teams that I think are overhyped in this are teams that have a big portal impact. And I think what they're doing is they're ignoring the teams that struggled. They're ignoring Florida States and USC's, and they're looking at the Arizona State and the Indianas. And they're saying, look, they won with portal guys. Sam Levitt was a portal guy. They had plenty of portal guys. We're going with them. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's fair enough. And look, at the end of the day, preseason rankings like this, it's always a lot of it starts to come to light in the first 3 weeks of the season anyways. And that's just what I look at as well. Another thing that the magazine breaks down are the preseason All-American teams, and Athlon Sports released a first, second, and third team All-American. Notre Dame had 4 players spread out across those 3 teams, and there were 2 offensive players, 2 defensive players. And I think it doesn't come to the surprise of many people. Jeremiah Love was the first team All-American running back preseason. Leonard Moore was a first team cornerback on the first team defense. Emil Wagner was second team right tackle All-American. And then Drake Bowen made the third team preseason All-American team for Athlon Sports. I'm happy to see our guy Drake Bowen get some love on those lists as well. So overall, big takeaways. How do you feel about the people who did make it? And do you think that there were people that were kind of left off that you think maybe should have made it on there?
Well, I was happy to see Leonard Moore on the first team. And, that he wasn't even good enough to get mentioned as a top returning player by ESPN, but he's a first team All-American here. I'm comfortable with Emil Wagner being the second team All-American on the offensive line. Drake Bowen, third team, that's fair. Adon Schuler, I thought, should get a little bit more preseason love. I'm okay with none of the receivers being on there. Even Malachi Fields, 50 catches for 800 yards does not make you an All-American. It makes you an impact player in the Notre Dame offense. It doesn't make you a first, second, or third team All-American. The defensive line wise, same thing. A lot of guys that could be there, but it's more of a rotation. The only one that I was like, hey, this guy I think belongs in the conversation is I was a little surprised that they only had one All-American from the offensive line and we'll talk about the unit rankings in a minute, but it's relevant here. You have Notre Dame as the number 1 ranked offensive line in college football, but only one All-American, and it's a second teamer. So I thought we'd maybe see Billy Schrouth on the third team or maybe some projections of Charles Jagasol there. They were willing to project with certain players. When you look at having Cardinal Tate as a second team player, actually they had Cardinal Tate as a second and a third team player. Did you notice that?
I saw that. I was like, did they mean Bryant Wesco or TJ Moore?
They meant one of the Clemson guys, just because they had Antonio Williams. I would imagine Wesco was the one because they had Antonio Williams as a second teamer. But there's clearly a projection with Cardinal Tate. Now, could Cardinal Tate be a second team All-American? Yes, he could. My point is not that but it's clear they're making a projection there because his numbers last year don't project that. And Cam Coleman and Mekhi Lemon, their numbers last year do not project them to be All-Americans, but they're on there. So my argument was, well, if you're going to project like that, then we should be talking about a Charles Jagasol or a Billy Schrouth being at least a third team because you do view them as the number 1 O-line. That's really my only preseason All-American beef. There's several players in Notre Dame could end up being All-Americans. I mean, one of the receivers, Eli Raridan, one of your defensive linemen, you could look at Adon Schuler, but they all would have to kind of play beyond, well beyond what they've done to be there. I'm fine with the guys they have there now. I really am. Because part of what makes Notre Dame so good is they have such a deep rotation that nobody's putting up All-American numbers. So I'm fine with that overall. I still would have liked to seen a second offensive lineman to justify having them as the number 1 ranked offensive line.
Yeah, I was shocked not to see at least a Billy Schrouth on one of the second or third teams, most likely third. To some of your points, am I up in arms about a wide receiver not making it? No, but I was a little surprised to not see Malachi Fields on the third team, especially when I saw Cam Coleman on there. I think that tells me it's okay, you're going projection based off of Cam Coleman hasn't reached his ceiling and he's
a 5-star recruit.
Yep. But with Malachi Fields, you think that he's reached his ceiling. I was also non-Notre Dame player. I was also a little shocked Evan Stewart wasn't on one of these lists and guys like Cam Coleman were. I thought that was interesting. He returns as Oregon's number 1 receiver. Not that I have any beef with that. That was just an observation. I thought that was a little interesting. And then with a lot of the hype that Miami's getting, I was shocked. I don't think he should have been on there, but I was amazed that Carson Beck wasn't in the conversation for one of these, but Garrett Nussmeier was. So a little bit of interesting topics of conversation there. Neither of the Texas A&M running backs were on there, but we're going to get into later on in the show, some of the position rankings overall make that a little bit interesting. So, it's an interesting list for sure, but nothing that I'm up in arms about and heavily disagree with.
Yeah. Agree.
Any other thoughts on the All-American list that they had, Brian?
Yeah. Look, I look at Arch Manning and I think he's a heck of a player, but you said something to me in a text message. If he doesn't pass for 4,000 yards, 40 touchdowns and lead them to a championship, it's almost like they're going to say he was a disappointment. The hype he's getting having started 2 games. And it's not even that it's not possible, but there's just this assumption that he's going to be the best quarterback in college football next year. And look, I get there's not a lot of, in my opinion, proven quarterbacks coming back. I understand that, but goodness gracious, that kid's getting a lot of push for someone who's only played started 2 games and didn't even play that well in one of those 2 games.
All of the hype that Arch Manning is getting, I hope he has a successful season. Not to, see it come true. There's a good chance Notre Dame meets Texas in the playoffs, in which case I hope he doesn't have that great of a game, but I look at a kid like Arch Manning, it's dude, this kid's 19 years old and you're putting the weight of the world on his shoulders. Number 1 overall projected draft pick by some analysts in the 2026 NFL draft and best quarterback in college football. And and entering this season as the #1 Heisman candidate. And it's like, guys, like if he doesn't pan out to be any sort of that, he's going to fall into the Cade Klubnik, Drew
which
Allen
is unfortunate.
conversation.
Yeah,
It is.
like there's a lot of people that still don't think Cade Klubnik's that good because he didn't live up to the 5-star hype immediately being thrust into the starting lineup.
Mm-hmm. And I hope for Arch Manning's sake that doesn't come
Drew
true.
Aller gets a lot of that, in my opinion, as well, because he was so hyped coming out of high school.
Oh yeah,
that like, and again, Drew Aller's not an elite quarterback. I'm not saying Drew Aller should be a first or second or third team All-American. He shouldn't be. But it's kind of like, look, I'm not the biggest Sam Levitt fan, but I watched Sam Levitt go to work against Texas last year.
Yeah.
In the playoff. Like, I mean, Arch has got a long way to go to just be Sam Levitt. Now, could he be? Of course he could be. But to your point, Trevor, it's almost like you guys are setting that guy up to fail.
Mm-hmm.
So where now if he doesn't do those things, now we've got a million stories about what happened to Arch. Why isn't Arch doing this? That's the thing for me. It's not even like, oh, Arch sucks. He's over it. No, I think Arch Manning's a very talented quarterback. I just feel like they're using the name to hype him up now. And it's the same thing I said about Deion Sanders. And that's exactly what happened. You're giving him all this undeserved attention so that the minute he wins, you can be like, let's continue run. Or if they lose, now we can tear him down.
Mm-hmm.
Whole build up to Deion's first year. No negative stories about Deion. The minute they lose some games, there's all these articles. Everybody and their mother's got an article talking to a source about how bad the culture is and all this other kind of stuff in between year 1 and year 2. Because it's like, we're going to build you up so we can make money off tearing you down as well. And that's the problem I have with it.
Well, and indirectly too, it also opens up the can of worms for different content purposes. It starts opening up the conversation. Okay, well, what does this mean for Steve Sarkisian? Quinn Ewers digressed, and now Arch Manning, this heralded prospect, he underperformed. There's a lot of talk about Texas's young wide receivers and how explosive they are. Did they not live up to the hype? So there's a lot of different ways that it could be spun, which is really upsetting when you put that much hype into a kid like Arch Manning. So legitimately, and I'm saying this wholeheartedly, I do hope he has a good season, because
I think he will.
Doesn't, I do too.
I just don't know if it's going to be first team All-American. I mean, preseason #1 team. You got all these people predict him to win a national championship. It's like, is it even possible for this? I mean, you look at it here. I think he was their #1 Heisman Trophy contender as well. Let me look that up. Yes, he's their #1 of the Tier 1 Heisman Trophy candidates in their magazine. And it's just like, if that kid doesn't win a championship and win the Heisman and be a first-team All-American as a first-year starter, it's going to be considered a disappointment.
Mm-hmm.
Think about it. If Texas goes to the semifinals again, Arch is a third-team All-American and doesn't finish in the top 4 or 5 of the Heisman Trophy voting, that's underachieving based on his preseason expectations.
Mm-hmm. Which is unfortunate. Yeah. Yep. It's definitely unfortunate. Another thing that this magazine did is they ranked all of the units in the country, top 10s, and they did quarterback, running back. I think they grouped wide receiver and tight ends together, like just pass catchers.
Yeah, I couldn't tell. Let me look that up. Let me pull that up. Yeah, it says wide receivers on here.
Okay. Well, there wasn't a tight end ranking
that they would do that, but it just said wide receivers.
So wide receivers, O-line, D-line, linebackers, and then DBs. They grouped corners and safeties and nickels together alike. So Notre Dame had basically ranked in every single category except for quarterback and wide receiver, something to be expected. At least wide receivers, I kind of expected it.
No, I'll push back on that. But yeah, quarterback's the one that I expected them not to be in the top 10 because they don't have a single quarterback that's played a meaningful down.
Yeah.
I mean, Arch has played way more meaningful downs than anyone on the
absolutely
depth chart at quarterback.
Yeah, absolutely. The reason why I say I wasn't surprised at receiver is because of how they're talked about nationally. It's not how I feel.
Surprised, but they should have been based on who they have in there. They should be. Is going to be.
I think they should have been, but I'm not surprised that they aren't.
Yeah, I'm not even going to advocate for Notre Dame being a top 10 unit. I'm going to advocate for how the heck do you have Georgia number 8 and Penn State number 10 and not have Notre Dame?
Because it's the same reason. Like, it's to your point about Athlon being consistent. It's because they talked about Zachariah Branch going to Georgia, and
he wasn't as good as Notre Dame's best receiver.
Agreed, but
this is my whole point. It's like, it's not even about the portal. It's about, this is all recruiting rankings. Like, you can't sit there and tell me Penn State's got a top 10 receiving core, even if you just evaluate the guys they got, and then tell me that Notre Dame doesn't. And I'm not advocating for Notre Dame being in there. I'm saying this goes back to the argument that we continue to make, that there's assumptions being made about certain teams where Notre Dame's got to prove it. Notre Dame should have to prove it. But why did they have to prove it and Penn State's doesn't? Who had a better receiving core last year? Notre Dame did. In that game, they did. And then you add a guy like Malachi Fields to it. You add a guy like Will Pauling to it, who may not even start at Notre Dame. And then you also look at it, and you've got Jordan Faison coming back. And it's kind of the point is like, how does Georgia with Noah Thomas and Zechariah Branch? Like, no. Like, Noah Thomas has not produced anywhere close to the way that Malachi Fields is produced as a power 4 player. Again, we're not talking about Chris Mitchell coming from Florida International. I'm talking about a power 5 guy. Noah Thomas last year had 39 catches for 574 yards. The year before that, he was at 29 for 359. The year before that, he was 5 for 51. Zechariah Branch last year had what? USC at like 40-some catches for 500 yards. Let me pull up his numbers. He had 47 catches for 503 yards, 1 touchdown. 31 catches for 320 yards the year before. Oh, he's a big play guy. As a special teams guy, sure. As a offensive player, he's averaging about 10 yards a catch over 2 years. That's my point. It's, if we're going to say, hey, this team has to prove it, totally fair, then shouldn't this other team have to prove it as well? And that's sort of my issue with the receivers. I also have it's going to be interesting. The 2 and 3, I was a little surprised they had Clemson number 2 and Alabama number 3. I don't necessarily have a problem with it. I just felt like most people assumed that 1 and 2 was going to be Ohio State and Bama. So I was happy to see Clemson's receiving core get a little bit of respect, because that was a very good receiving core this year.
Yeah,
last year. I'm going to be very curious to see if Alabama can take them over when season starts. So I'm good with the ranking. I was surprised by it, but sometimes it's a good surprise. Is Isaiah Horton enough into that rotation because right now, if you look at what is proven at those schools, Clemson had 3 really good players last year that are coming back. Bama had 2, and Ryan Williams and Jeremy Bernard. Clemson has 3. So Clemson brings everybody back. Bama brings the top 2 guys back, and then they add Isaiah Horton. Is that going to be enough for them to overcome Clemson? So I thought that was an interesting one. Auburn at 4 is also interesting. Like that, again, it makes sense that they're going to put Auburn 4 when you consider they have Cam Coleman as a second-team All-American. And I'm actually okay. I think Cam Coleman is incredibly talented. I question if the quarterback play is going to be good enough for him to be an All-American, but he's very talented. You had LSU number 5. Again, that's projecting that guys are going to be a lot better at LSU than they have been at their previous stops.
Yeah.
Which I don't think is necessarily accurate. I actually was surprised that they had Texas at number 6. And I actually, you know what, I didn't check. Do they talk about Emmett Mosley in their preseason
that I'm
ranking?
not 100% sure on.
Let me see if they got him in the 2 deep. They do. I think Texas's receiving core is very interesting. I'm actually okay with it being number 6, because there's a lot of, you got to show me, but there's a chance that receiving core could end up being better with the addition of Emmett Mosley. You need Ryan Wingo to have a breakout second season. You need DeAndre Moore to have a breakout second season. But I think Emmett Mosley should thrive. I mean, he put up decent numbers as a freshman with a bad quarterback.
Yeah.
A very inaccurate bad quarterback. So it's going to be very interesting to see that group jump. And then Arizona State should have a really good receiving core. Jordan Tyson is a dude.
Yep.
My big issue is more of just the Georgia Penn State. And if anything, I'd be more okay with Penn State being in there than Georgia. because I think Penn State gets a little bit of an additional push because of the numbers that Trevor Pena put up last year.
Yeah.
But he did that in a very pass-heavy offense, and he did it in a league that's not super, great. But at the same time, he still put up very good numbers. You can't take that away from the guy. But Kyron Hudson's a good player, 38 catches for 462 yards, 12.2 yards per catch, and 3 touchdowns last season. And so then you look at Trevor Pena, and he caught, was it like 80 passes for like 900 and some yards, correct, last year? So he had 84 catches. He was number 2 on the team in catch, or number 1 on the team in catches, number 2 on the team in yards, 941 yards, 11.2 yards per catch, 9 touchdowns last season, in an offense that passed for almost 5,000 yards. And then you're getting a really good player from Troy. I like the kid from Troy they got as well. But top 10 receiving core, so I'd actually say you could argue for, but I would make a stronger case for Penn State to be in there than Georgia, and they had Georgia ahead of Penn State.
Yeah,
that was a bit of my issue. I think the Penn State one I can live with. I can live with that projection into this offense. I really can. Plus, like Trevor Pena, for example, he's going to have a run game support, like protecting him, that he did not have at Syracuse. They didn't even try to run the ball.
No.
But it's the one where Georgia's just the one. It's like, this is all about recruiting rankings. This is 100% about recruiting rankings and not about what these guys have been in college at all.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the same conversation that we have about just transfer portal rankings and the constant disrespect that Malachi Fields is, well, I guess lack of attention that he's receiving in that aspect. But yeah, like the wide receiver rankings, I think in bulk is the one that I disagree with the most out of these, which is pretty frustrating. That's just why I said it's not a surprise to me that Notre Dame is not on this list because of how they're talked about. That's the irritating part for me. But Notre Dame does have, outside of quarterback and running back, they do have a lot of – they're ranked in every other position. At running back, they are – go ahead.
And ranked high.
Mm-hmm.
Just a little bit of a nugget for you guys. The only team with more units ranked in the top 4 than Notre Dame, who has 4, is Texas, who has 5.
Mm-hmm.
So there's teams that have as many – there's actually teams that have more teams in the top 10 than Notre Dame. I think there's 2. I think Clemson does. I have the list on my other computer. Only team that has more top 4 units is Texas.
Yep.
Because Notre Dame, so Notre Dame has, to Trev's point, it's 5, right? It's
5.
Running backs, O-line, D-line, linebackers, secondary. Yep. But running backs are top 4, O-line's top 4, linebackers are top 4, and secondary's top 4. Mm-hmm. The only team with more top 4. So, like, yeah, there's teams with more. Like, there's one team that has like 4 or 5, but none of them are in the top 4. I think it was Oregon. Was it Oregon that was that way? Yes, Oregon's highest ranked unit is their running backs at 5, but their quarterback, they're in the top 10. Running back, receiver, D line. No, not D line.
Just
linebacker. Secondary, no, yeah. So those are like 4, but none of them are in the top 4. So Texas is, so it's not just that they're in the top 10, but they're considered in that upper echelon of the top of those groups as well, which is different than in the past because they'd have a D line in there, but the D line was lowest at 6. So just wanted to add that note. You can continue with the rest of what you're talking about.
Yeah, the running backs, they were ranked number 2. Penn State was ranked number 1, and we've had this conversation a lot on this show. It's like, look, if somebody wants to argue and pound their fists on the table that Penn State has a better running back duo than Notre Dame, fine, whatever. It's also par for the course for their All-American team. I believe Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton were both named.
First and second.
Yep, and Notre Dame.
Katron Allen being the all-purpose back, I thought was hilarious.
I did too. But, they had just Jeremiah Love from Notre Dame.
18 catches last year, Trevor. Yeah. What are we talking about here? 18 catches. What are you, all purpose?
Yeah, I think they just
3 running backs. Don't give me an all-purpose guy. You're gonna have Desmond Reed on the first team and Katron Allen on the second team. Those 2 guys have nothing in common.
No,
nothing in common.
No, I think it was definitely more of just they needed a spot for Katron Allen, and they already filled out the top 2 running back spots, so they put him in under all purpose. But if somebody wants to pound their fists on the table and proclaim that Penn State has the better running back room, fine. It is what it is. I disagree with it, but I'm not gonna fight you to the death over it. Notre Dame came in number 2 there. Offensive line, they're ranked number 1 in the country. I thought that was interesting.
Yes.
That is a very interesting ranking to me. We'll dive into that here soon. Defensive line, they came in at number 6. Linebacker, they came in at number 4. And DB, they came in at number 3. That one I will disagree with wholeheartedly, but we'll get to that.
It's not 3 that I have the problem with. It's that Bama's ahead of them. But we'll get into that. It's also not a surprise that the teams that they have as the number 1 and 2 running back room also have the number 1 and 2 offensive lines in their rankings. So I did not anticipate Notre Dame having the number 1 offensive line. And honestly, you have to. What I'll say about it is I probably would not have Notre Dame's offensive line number 1 because I have a little bit of I need to see it together. But it's consistent with what they've done with all their rankings, All-Americans, top 25s and everything, because it's a projection. Like I don't know that I could have them ahead of Texas A&M right now. Now, do I think that Notre Dame's going to have a shot to end up being better? Absolutely. But right now, can I say it's going to be better? I don't know that I can say that. But they are putting a lot of emphasis on projection of what they think is going to happen. In that case, I am totally fine with them having Notre Dame number 1, even though I don't think that I would. We're kind of going to put our own top 10s together this year, Trev. So it's going to be funny. As we've said, we're not going to criticize other people's rankings on things if we're not willing to put out our own. So that's part of our summer schedule or summer content plan is we will have our own top 10. But I don't have a huge problem with it being number 1. My own personal thing is I kind of have a little bit of I need to see it mode where like A&M, I know what their line's going to be. The question is it as good as it's going to get? One thing to say about Notre Dame is Notre Dame's offensive line has the potential to be a lot better this year than it was last year. I think Texas A&M can be better, but I don't know how much better they're going to get. It's going to all be built on experience and things like that, but it's still a very good line. But I honestly, Trev, I don't know that I'd have Notre Dame's like if I was doing it right now, and if I was a grant that Notre Dame and Penn State have the number 1 and 2 running back rooms and number 1 and 2 offensive lines in the country, I would flip them both.
I would too.
I'd put Notre Dame's running backs 1 and Penn State's 2, and I'd put Penn State's offensive line and Notre Dame's offense 1 and off Notre Dame's offensive line 2. That's what I would do.
Yep.
Penn State's offensive line played pretty well against Notre Dame last year.
Mm-hmm.
Now, again, they didn't have to go against Abdul Carter and deny Dennis Sutton and that group, but they still played well for the most part. Even the pressure that Jalen Snead got on Drew Aller on that last pick, it was a late pressure. Like they gave him a pocket early on. He just he ran out of it. So I thought that was a again, it's respect for Notre Dame. I was surprised that Notre Dame's defensive line was 6th.
Yep.
I think that's a fair ranking. I'm fine with it there. I was surprised Oregon's D-line wasn't in the top 10.
Yeah.
With the edge players they have coming back next year. I mean, they lost some good players too. They lost Jordan Birch and they lost the oh my goodness, I'm drawing a blank on the kid that was Harmon, the Harmon kid that was taken in the first round this past draft. But they got some portal guys coming in and their edges coming back are very good players. But I thought they'd be top 10. But overall, defensive line, Texas number 1. I understand it. But again, it's consistent from Athlon. Why is Texas number 1? 2 reasons. 1, they're bringing back Colin Simmons, who everybody expects to be a stud. I do as well. But they're also putting a lot of emphasis on the portal and the portal pickups, which again, they've been doing that throughout. So if you're going to do that, be consistent with it. And the one thing I liked about what Athlon did is there's consistency to this. When you see this, you understand why Texas is number 1. When you see this, you understand why Clemson is ahead of certain. The only lack of consistency is your rankings here don't match Notre Dame being 6.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's my thing because you've got You've got Notre Dame is ahead of Georgia at running back. Notre Dame's ahead of Georgia on the offensive line. There's very little gap in D-line. Very little gap in linebackers. Bigger gap in the secondary. And Georgia's ahead of Notre Dame. I thought that was
I do also think it's interesting that Clemson has more defensive linemen named to the All-American defense across the board, but Clemson's ranked lower in defensive line rankings than Texas.
Agree.
I think that's also interesting. Spoiler alert, Texas has the number one spot in all defensive categories. They have them as the number one D-line, the number one linebacking group, and the number one secondary. Now, to Brian's point,
position, come on.
Yep. To Brian's point, it is consistent with them with the Texas hype, and they're going to be this great team. But again, I just don't at some of the positions. I disagree with the defensive rankings wholeheartedly. Alabama at 2, no. Ohio State's 4th behind Notre Dame. I thought that was interesting with them having Caleb Downs coming back. I like Jermaine Matthews. Notre Dame being at 3rd behind Bama and Texas. I just don't see, especially after they lost Jahdae Barron and Andrew Makuba. They're putting a lot of emphasis on the the Muhammad kid?
Malik Muhammad, yeah.
Yep.
And then the Michael Taft kid coming back, and
Yep. And I mean, they have D'Angelo Pons ranked as a I think second team All-American corner, but they don't have Indiana's secondary.
Indiana's secondary should absolutely be a top 10 unit because he's not the only guy they have coming back.
No, Amari Farrell comes back.
Yes, who's a very good football player as well. But yes, I agree with you on that, Trev. I think Texas is getting a big jump on at secondary that doesn't make a lot of sense. But Indiana not having a top 10 secondary with Pons coming back, you got Amari Farrell coming back, you got a couple good transfer players. Jamari Sharp comes back. You've got good depth at the position. Bryson Bonds played a bunch last year at safety. That surprised me. I'm looking at this list, and Indiana not having a top 10 linebacker room either also surprised me. They lost the one kid at linebacker, but who they have coming back, they have 2 guys coming back, and obviously Aiden Fisher comes back, who was their best linebacker last year. They lost Jalen Walker, but they've got Isaiah Jones comes back, but then they had another kid last year, Elijah Hardy, who was a freshman for them last year, linebacker. He only had 22 tackles, but he had 5.5 tackles for loss and a sack in limited snaps. He's a very athletic kid from Florida. I thought Indiana's linebacker room also belonged in the top 10.
Agreed. Yeah, agreed. I think of all of the rankings and all the lists that Athlon Sports came out with, this is the one that I kind of have the most questions about. The national unit rankings are the ones that raise the most questions for me, because it is kind of okay, so what are you seeing here? You have more All-Americans for Clemson, but Texas has the better D-line.
Right.
So where's the consistency there?
It's
you have D'Angelo. Yeah.
It's the portal. It's all those portal D tackles. And I think the other argument you could make is, yes, Clemson has more All-Americans, but Colin Simmons is going to be significantly better than anybody that Texas has or that Clemson has. Maybe. Did they have Colin Simmons? He was first team All-American, right?
I believe so. Yeah, he was. Yeah, he was first team. The first team D linemen were Dylan Stewart, Colin Simmons, T.J. Parker, and Peter Woods.
Right. So you have two Clemson guys on the D line. I think a lot of that just depends on more depth at Texas, and then of course the portal guys. But Colin Simmons might be the best defensive edge in the country this year. Is sort of the projection. A little bit.
I mean, to your point, they even had about Indiana. They even had Aiden Fisher listed as a third-team preseason All-American defensive player, but then didn't have them ranked in the. I mean, the only DB, the 2 DBs that they have for Texas in here in the All-American teams are Malik Muhammad is a third team, and then Taft is a second team.
That's where I don't think Notre Dame gets the respect of is with a Don Schuler.
Yep.
I don't think that he gets enough credit for how good of a player he is, and how not even just what I think he's going to be, but just what he was last year. So what?
They have Dylan Thieneman ranked as a first-team preseason All-American for defense.
Saw that.
Maybe I'll be wrong about him. I just don't see it.
Yeah, he's a good. It's like he got really overhyped as a freshman. He's a good player.
He is. He's a
good football player. But yeah, if he doesn't go to, or if he goes to, let's say he stays at Purdue, I don't know that he's a first-team All-American.
Agreed.
That's just my take on that. But I mean, overall, just looking at this, Trevor, there's none that I'm like, oh, I talked about receiver, but there's not a lot of others. I just look at it and like quarterback, the number one quarterback room is Texas. That's basically just a ranking of who you think the best quarterbacks are.
Mm-hmm.
That has nothing to do with the room. Because otherwise, how's Texas number one? How's Clemson number two if we're talking about the room?
How's LSU number three?
If we're just talking about the room. I mean, well, LSU I get because isn't AJ Swan there? Like as far as like a good backup quarterback. So, I mean, I kind of get that one. You've got Michael Van Buren transferred in from Mississippi State. You got Colin Hurley came in. So I actually get LSU if we're talking about room because like LSU's the one that deserves to be there because of the depth. Michael Van Buren was a starter in the SEC last year. AJ Swan's not there anymore. But when you look at Texas, it's like you're just saying that because you think Arch is the best quarterback. You're not saying that because of the room. Because if Arch goes down, you're going to what? Trey Owens? KJ Lacey? Like no. So it's going to be interesting. Very interesting. I think you can make a case that Ohio State has a better room than Texas. Because you've got Julian Sand, you've got the kid from Idaho whose name I can't pronounce, and then you've got Tavian Sinclair, who's ranked ahead of KJ Lacey coming out.
Yeah.
So it is interesting. And then like Miami, you got Miami top 10 because what? Because you think Carson Beck's that good? It can't be because you think it's because Emory Williams is that good. So I wouldn't put Notre Dame's quarterback room in the top 10 preseason, but I think it can be there by the end of the year.
Sure. Yeah, I get that.
But it was interesting how they did that. But overall, Trev, I think the unit rankings were fair. But I did thought it was good to point out that only Texas has more units ranked in the top 4 than Notre Dame. I just thought it was absurd that Texas is allegedly going to have the number one D-line, the number one linebacker room, and the number one secondary in all of college football. That's a lot. That's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. And the number one quarterback. I mean, they're just setting this Texas team up to be like the greatest team in college football since 2019. It's like, guys, they're a good program. This is a good team, but let's not set the bar up that they're going to beat 9 top 10 ranked opponents by double digits every single week. Like, it's just not.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't see it.
This is interesting. Some love in there for Florida, but there's a couple positions that I thought Florida had a shot to be in the top 10 that they weren't in the top 10. So it was an interesting ranking. I'm very curious to see how ours looks once we're all done. Like when we actually do our rankings, we're like, you know what, maybe I've come around on this unit that I didn't think belonged there. But I can promise you one thing: when I do my top 10 receiver rooms, Georgia will not be in there. I can't say Penn State won't. It's my issue is more of Penn State versus Notre Dame. What's proven versus what's not.
Sure.
But the Penn State Georgia one is another debate. If I'm a Penn State fan, I'm thinking, how is Georgia's receiving core ahead of ours?
Oh yeah.
Because they're both completely relying on portal guys. I mean, unless you want to talk about Dylan Bell, who dropped a wide open touchdown pass against Notre Dame last year. Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't think so.
I don't either.
Let me ask you this. What position group has the biggest gap between 1 and 2, in your opinion?
Ooh, between 1 and 2?
Yep. Like, what is the most obvious number 1 unit there?
I would say Ohio State at wide receiver.
Yep.
Agreed. Yeah. I mean, like that room is just completely.
You've got 3 number 1s.
Literally.
At least 2 number 1s and a potentially really good. I don't know that Brandon Inniss has done enough to say he's definitely number 1. I think he's got number 1 talent. But Cardinal Tate and Jeremiah Smith are both legit number 1s.
Yeah.
Like even Alabama's room that I love, it's Brian Williams is a number 1, and then Jeremy Bernard's a great number 3.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Isaiah Horton can be a really good number 2. Or Jeremy Bernard's a pretty good number 2, and Isaiah Horton is a great number 3. But the 1-2, I mean, like Ryan Williams isn't that far off of Jeremiah Smith, but Cardinal Tate's a legit impact wide receiver there.
Yeah.
And then they've got Clemson number 2. And again, Clemson's probably better with proven 1, 2, 3. Like their 1, 2, 3 is more proven because their number 3 is more proven than Ohio State's number 3. I'm pretty sure that I'm accurate on that. So Clemson last year, because you got Antonio Williams, TJ Moore, and Bryant Wesco. So if you look at Ohio State last year, Trev obviously had Jeremiah Smith, who was a 1,000-yard receiver. He's a great player, great talent, did that as a true freshman. He had 76 catches for 1,300 yards. Antonio Williams had 75 catches for 904 yards. Their number 2 is Cardinal Tate, who had 52 catches for 733 yards, 4 touchdowns. Clemson, Bryant Wesco, 41 catches for 708 yards, 5 touchdowns in only 12 games. And then their number 3 guy is expected to be Brandon Innes, who had 14 catches for 176 yards and a touchdown, compared to Clemson's number 3, who is TJ Moore, had 45 catches for 651 yards and 5 touchdowns. So production-wise, you could argue Clemson has the best returning receiving corps in the country. But I just think you have to factor in the fact that's because they were the 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
Where Ohio State's number 2 is a guy that had 81 catches for over 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns. It's now going to get dispersed more likely, as opposed to a ton of that going to Jeremiah Smith. I think most of that goes to Cardinal Tate and Brandon Innes. So like with Notre Dame, it's like with Riley Leonard leaving, a chunk of that's going to go to Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price, a little bit to the other guys, where I think the majority of the production that you lose with the Mecca doesn't get overtaken by Jeremiah Smith. I think it's going to get overtaken by the other 2 guys. That's why I just think that's the deepest room. And then there's a lot of other younger players on that depth chart that are also like people be very excited about some of the other guys on that depth chart if they weren't behind the 3 guys that we just got done talking. I mean, Bryson Rogers is a really good football player. Mylan Graham is a redshirt freshman, very talented player. Liked him coming out of high school. They got Quincy Porter coming in as a freshman. Like, they're pretty deep. They're pretty good.
Yeah. I'd say the clearest cut is the Ohio State receiving room for sure.
Take out running back and O-line. We've had that discussion. Is there any other Notre Dame room that you think deserves either mention for being number 1 right now, or if the answer is no, has an opportunity to become number 1 by season's end? I have 2.
Yeah, I mean, I think the defensive backs have a strong case to be number 1 in the country. I truly do. Mm-hmm. I mean, the projection that Malik Muhammad is getting is what Leonard Moore has already done, in my opinion. Like, I could be misplaced in saying that, but then you compound that with Christian Gray, who a lot of people go based on numbers, statistically had a really good season last year, highlighted by a game-sealing interception in the college football playoff semifinals that set Notre Dame up for their field goal drive. Adon Schuler returns as a 16-game starter, and whoever
also
fills in
had
along.
Some huge minutes in the postseason. Go ask Trevor Etienne about his ability to make big plays.
And whoever steps up at safety alongside of him is going to be an athletic freak. I mean, they will either be 6'5", 6'4", 6'2", or 6'1". At safety, I think they have a strong case to be the number 1 secondary. And then the team that it wouldn't, or the position group that it wouldn't shock me if they're number 1 by the end of the season, I think linebacker has a strong case for that as well. Drake Bowen is starting to get a little bit more love as the offseason goes on, which I love to see. But
including by Athlon, who had him as a 3rd-team All-American.
Mm-hmm. But, when you start talking about guys like Kingston and Jaden Osbury and Jalen Sneeden, we've talked about, look, Madden Framo at times in the spring looked a little lost, and he's still working on becoming a well-rounded football player. But man,
he's at best your 5th linebacker right now.
Literally.
At best.
And the second that the second that the light bulb comes on for him, it's going to be hard to keep him off the football.
You say the same thing about Bodie Calhoun.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's the thing is I think there's better starting lineups right now than Notre Dame's, because Notre Dame's doesn't know their number 2 is going to be.
Yeah.
I don't know that there's a better, like, I think you could argue that Georgia's 1-2 punch. You could argue is better than Notre Dame's with C.J. Allen and Raylan Wilson. You expect to be their starters, right? I don't know that I would trade Georgia's room. You know, it's at least debatable. You got Chris Cole in there. I mean, it's a very good room. And part of this is I don't think, because of recruiting rankings, I don't think Jaden Alsbury gets enough respect for how good he was last year.
Agreed. Because
he wasn't a super highly ranked recruit by most people. You know, but like I hear all this talk about how good Chris Cole is as part of that linebacker rotation at Georgia, and he is. Chris Cole's a good football player, man. Like Notre Dame recruited him. He's a heck of a player. Last year as a freshman had 16 tackles and 2 tackles for loss. Well, Notre Dame had a freshman last year that probably not going to start for them this year, had 37 tackles last season, 2.5 tackles for loss and a sack. But what doesn't get talked enough about is how good Jaden Alsbury was. 58 tackles, 6.5 tackles for loss, and he didn't start it. He started 1 game. It was against an option team. I don't think that gets talked about enough, is how deep Notre Dame is a linebacker. But a lot of it is because people look at Bodie Cahoon, he wasn't very highly ranked recruit. They don't realize how good that kid is. And so that's what I think is interesting, is I love the depth at linebacker. I don't know that I'd trade that room for anybody. I'm being serious. I really don't. And if I thought there was, I just wouldn't bring it up. I wouldn't mention it. It's not like it's a mailbag or a bites a hold question I got to answer. I'm just telling you, I don't know that there's if it was like, if I could trade this starter for that guy, I wouldn't mind seeing a side by side of, you know, Drake Bowen and insert a couple guys here. But I'm like, yeah, but do you really want to do that? Because I want to see what Kingston can do next to Drake Bowen.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, but if I had to trade, it's an entire room for the entire room. I don't know that there's anybody I'd trade with right now. I really don't. So I'm okay with them not being number 1 now, but I do think that by the end of the year, we're going to be having a different conversation.
Absolutely. And that's exactly where I'm okay with the linebackers not being number 1 as of today, but I think that narrative will quickly change as the season progresses. The only one that I will bang my fist on the table is I think Notre Dame has the best secondary in college football coming into the start of the season. I truly do. And
yeah, I mean, you have arguably the best cornerback room. And you talk about Texas having Malik Muhammad, who's a second-team All-American, and Michael Taff, who's a third-team All-American. No, Michael Taff was second-team, and Malik Muhammad was third-team.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Notre Dame brings back Leonard Moore, who's first-team. I think Don Schuler not at least being on third-team is one where I'm like, I don't know if I would go there. I don't know that I would trade the SMU kid or the kid from Minnesota. Those are good football players for Don Schuler.
Yeah.
Then you got Devontae Smith from Alabama, and you know, Christian Gray, even in a quote-unquote disappointing second half of the season, was still a pretty good player who made some big-time plays for them last year. So it's another one where I'm not sure that there's a secondary that I would say I'm going to trade your whole group for that whole group. I think by the end of the year, and I think Archer said in the chat, I think by the end of the year, and by saying I wouldn't trade someone for another player doesn't mean I'm not saying that other guy's not good. Y'all get that, right? It just means I think this guy's better. I think by the end of the year, the 2 best secondaries could very well be Ohio State and Notre Dame. Not in that order, just Notre Dame and Ohio State.
Yeah.
Because I don't know that I could put Ohio State number 1 right now either, even with Caleb Downs, because there's a lot of guys stepping into the lineup. But I don't think Denzel Burke was that good last year, especially, well, at least once he got hurt. I don't think he was that good last year. I think Matthews could end up being a better player than what Denzel was last year. Now, maybe not what Denzel was a couple years ago when he was really good, but what he was last year. So I think they're a team that they had some big losses, kind of like Notre. Like I'm sympathetic to Notre Dame not getting the number 1 spot right now because you lost your 2-time All-American, and but didn't Texas also lose that too with Jahdae Barron, who got drafted before any of Notre Dame's guys? And then also you had Andrew McCoop who got picked.
Well,
right?
And
go ahead, Trev.
If they're going to use projection for like Georgia's wide receiver room, why can you not do that for the Notre Dame safety position? That's a question that I have.
Yeah,
because
especially since the best game that Devontae Smith played last year was probably against Georgia.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and if any other like if Texas had a safety room to replace Andrew Mukuba that consisted of a 6'5", a 6'4", a 6'2", and a 6'1" guy, like they would.
A couple of those guys were pretty highly ranked coming out of high school too.
Mm-hmm. So
I think that's part of it. They're not as ranked as high as they should have been.
Yeah.
If Jadon Blair was ranked as high nationally as what I have him, I think the conversation is a little bit different. But it just goes back to, again, there's an assumption about, well, this portal guy is going to be here and that portal guy is going to be there. I don't understand the difference between the two. So it creates some interest. But like, this is part of the fun of the preseason because we're all projecting. We're projecting about the Notre Dame guys. We may end up being wrong, but that's what's fun about this. But end of the story, it was interesting to have that. The other thing, the one thing I'll push back on is why I think you should make a case for Notre Dame being in the top 10 at receiver and not Georgia or Penn State is one of their breakout players. So that's the last thing that they kind of get into is they did a prediction for breakout players this season, and they did like top transfers and all these other type of grades. But one of the things they did breakout players, and it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 players. They had as breakout players nationally. And I actually like this list. Dylan Raiola at Nebraska, Dante Moore, Austin Simmons at Ole Miss, Damon Williams at Washington. Have you seen him play? He's fun. He's fun to watch.
Yeah.
Gideon Davidson at Clemson, freshman. You had Mike Matthews at Tennessee. That's going to be an interesting one to watch, as he kind of gets thrust into a bigger role. Luke Reynolds at Penn State, tight end. I love that one. I think he's going to be a breakout player stepping in for Tyler Warren. Edric Houston for Ohio State. Again, same type of thing. LT Overton for Alabama, I like. And then KJ Bolden at Georgia, another good pick. But they also had Jaden Greathouse. And I think if you're projecting Jaden Greathouse, and here's what they said about Jaden. If the last two games of 24 are a sign of things to come, Greathouse should be a contender for All-American honors. After catching 29 passes through the first 14 games, Greathouse nabbed 13 for 233 yards and 3 scores combined in playoff contests against Penn State and Ohio State. All right, I agree with all that. Wholeheartedly agree with all that. And I took a deep dive into the board, and you guys remember this article a week or two ago on the message board. Is a message board only thing, where I compared his numbers, yards per target, yards per catch, completion percentage, contested rate, success, and compared to like a Emeka Egbuka and a lot of the high picks and a lot of top guys coming back. And I think there's only one guy that had better numbers, and it wasn't Emeka Egbuka. And point being, like, when targeted, Jaden Greathouse has been really flipping good. So I have no problem with that. But how do you predict him to potentially be an All-American? They're adding Malachi Fields. They have Jordan Faison coming back. And then you also are adding Will Pauling, who, yes, he was banged up last year. But some of these other receiver rooms that you're giving a lot of hype to, like LSU, the only reason you have LSU as a top 10 receiver room is because you think Nick Anderson's going to get back to form of what he was 2 years ago. For all the struggles that Will Pauling had last year, he was still better than Nick Anderson because Nick Anderson didn't play it down. So the point is that he's probably right now 4th on your receiver room. So that's kind of where my argument is your own magazine said that he's a breakout potential All-American, and then you put him with a 6'4", 220-pound guy who's had over 100 catches for over 1,600 yards the last 2 years. So that's kind of where I'm like, why is this here and that one there? I just think that's honestly one of the biggest areas where I understand Notre Dame fans being reluctant to dive into it. You've talked about this. And I look at it and say, I understand the whole we got to see it thing. My whole point is but isn't that true for a lot of teams? That's true for a lot of teams. They got to see it. Why are you assuming that all these new guys at Penn State are going to be good? But I got to wait and see if Malachi Fields can keep doing what he's been doing at the Power 5 level. That's my argument. And so I look at it, Trev, and say that's why I make the case that I think you can make a case that Notre Dame's receiving room is being underrated compared to others where they're making some assumptions about what kind of player they're going to be. It's my stance.
Yeah, no, I think that's totally fair. My thoughts on Notre Dame's receiving room has fluctuated as the offseason has kind of gone on. But, I think that they have an argument to be in the top 10. But like I said, I'm not surprised that Athlon Sports
did. Not surprised by it. I'm not like, I didn't open it up like, what? I totally thought they were going to be in the top 10. The only reason I started even thinking about it is when I saw Georgia and Penn State, but especially Georgia.
Yeah.
When I saw them in there, I was like, hold the phone. What are we doing here?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I can't go with you on that one.
I mean, even if you want to just talk production, I'm honestly kind of amazed that USC's isn't in here because they have Mekhi Lemon and Jacoby Lane coming back. Like that one was also interesting to me. Because like they did go and put up proven numbers. They put up more proven numbers than what Zachariah Branch left USC because he wasn't getting enough touches and then went to a receiving room that was ranked ahead of USC's.
Right.
Interesting.
Yep.
Very interesting.
Yep, it is. It is.
Well, any final thoughts, Brian, on Athlon's list as a whole or all these rankings that have came out? Because we're going to continue to do these as more and more magazines continue to get published.
I thought it was surprisingly positive to Notre Dame. Surprisingly positive to Notre Dame. And that was kind of encouraging. It was.
Yeah, I'm with you.
And when I look, the first thing I always do when I open up a magazine, I go right to the top 25. I normally go to the individual write-up of Notre Dame, but in this one I didn't because I knew what was in there. So that one I already knew. And I was like, Notre Dame 6, huh? Behind Georgia and Clemson. All right, this is going to be interesting. So I was kind of expecting a lot of tamping down Notre Dame and the rest, and I'm like, nope, none of that. And what was pretty cool was like they do 15 things to watch for the season. And the number one thing to watch is about Bill Belichick, which I totally get. The number 2 thing is Notre Dame aims for another step forward in 2025. Number 2 storyline of the offseason is can Notre Dame take it? And it was the whole write-up was positive about, what Marcus Freeman's done. You look at the All-American list. You look at they had Notre Dame versus Miami that's the 5th biggest game of the season. You have Greathouse as a breakout player. You've got only Texas having more position groups in the top 4. There's a lot of positive. Yeah. A lot of positive. So that's the difference. I mean, that like where, looking at past years, it's like, okay, that's an interesting dynamic that we're seeing different.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely. I was in the things that you sent over to me. I was shocked at how positive some of the conversation was around Notre Dame. One of my favorite things was like the little blurb that one of the opposing coaches said about Notre Dame. They're like, hey, look, contrary to what, and I'm obviously using Cliff Notes version here, but it was essentially along the lines of, look, based on what some of the national narrative has been, like Marcus Freeman is building like a program here, not just, they caught fire and they ran with a Cinderella story. They're recruiting bigger, faster, stronger players. There are some things that need to be worked out, but to Brian's point, like we've said this entire segment, you could make that case about every single team. You can make that case about every single team on all of these lists. And so Notre Dame is poised for.
I enjoyed it. I really did, Trev. I enjoyed kind of looking through it and like, did you come across anything other than some of the portal-driven top 25 teams that you were just like, dude, that is nuts? Georgia's receiver room is really the only one. There was nothing else that I looked at like, you're on crack. Like, you're on crack for that. Like, there was nothing like in the top 100 from On 3 that was just like, this is some of the dumbest stuff I've ever seen in my life, ever. Like, I sent Ryan that list from the other day, and I was like, because like I know Ryan's very high on Caleb Banks from Florida. So I sent him the list. I said, hey, I got something to make you laugh. And I asked him to compare 2 guys because I knew he doesn't like one guy, likes another. And so I showed him the list where they had the one guy that he doesn't like ranked ahead of the other. And you're just looking at, there's some ignorant stuff in this thing, some real dumb stuff. I didn't get that sense reading to the Athlon magazine. Like,
no, I didn't.
The Georgia thing, it's like, okay, they're projecting recruiting rankings into it, whatever. It's wrong, but it's not like you're an idiot. Like, you should no longer be doing this as a profession. No. Like I felt about the On 3 top 100 list. I literally thought you need to find something else better to do with your career. This ain't for you. This ain't for you.
Yeah, man. There was nothing in this that I thought was egregious. There was some stuff with Texas that I thought was over the top. I don't think they have the best returning defense in college football because that is what this list is portraying.
But they're top 4.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like I said, not egregious. I think it's a little over the top. Some of the stuff is a little overhyped, but it's very particular. There's nothing that I read in here that I was like really taken aback by. And so, yeah, I mean, it was I enjoyed it. It was a good read.
Yeah, it was fun. It was fun. Lindy's comes out next week. I've already ordered those for both of us, so hopefully we'll get them on time. But yeah, I like going through this stuff. It's fun to kind of go back and look and see kind of where they were at the end of the year, what they got right, what they got wrong. Yeah, it's a lot of fun doing that. So this is like one of my favorite times of the year, man. Especially now that college football for PlayStation is back. Because like as a 20-something teenager, like that was it. It was EA Sports comes out with College Football 25. The preseason magazines come out. Like, and it used to be, it was Athlon, Lindy's. There was Sporting News. Remember, you used to have Sporting News. They used to have Street and Smiths. Actually, Street and Smiths became Sporting News. And like ESPN used to have one. And then you got Phil Steele, which I can't do Phil Steele. It's unreadable for me. Is this your power ranking, your top 25? I can't tell which one am I looking at. Like he has two top 25s. Well, like I don't know what these, and then in his write-ups, he'll spend more time talking about past seasons than like the current. And it's just like, but my buddy, that's like his Bible. It's just I just can't do Phil Steele. It's just not my bag. But like the other ones I love. And then college football comes out in July. So this is the American male like season of glory these next couple months with the magazines coming out and then college football coming out in July.
It's a good time. That's how I got really good at memorizing like players' numbers, heights, and weights. Because back in the day, in the old systems, you had to go enter it in manual.
Yes,
like it didn't come preloaded. Yep. And so there was a point in time, I might still be able to do it, but there was a point in time where from like 2005 to like 2015, you could just name the year and the number of the player, and I would tell you who it was and how much they weighed and how tall they were. Yep. Like just because you had to go in and put it all in. Because back in the day, it was, in 2009, it was QB number 7.
Yes.
It wasn't Jimmy Clausen.
That's right. That's right.
Yep.
Young kids who this is their first version, like first time playing it, y'all don't understand, man. We had to literally go, and I would do other teams. Now, I wouldn't do the whole team, but I do like the star players for other teams too. Like
it got to the point where my dad would go buy other memory cards on eBay that had the rosters all fully loaded on it.
Awesome.
And then I would go through and I'd judge it, and I'd be like, that is not how tall this guy is. Like, that's not what this guy's name is.
You would even change heights and weights?
Mm-hmm.
That's fun.
Because I would have my dad print off their official roster, and I would go look at, and it would be like the smallest mistakes. I'd be like, Golden Tate is not 270 pounds, he's 215 pounds. Like I would go through and do all that stuff.
I didn't change heights and weights, but I would put names, and then some of them had just the dumbest like gear.
Yep.
It's like I was annoyed when I saw Micah Gilbert this year because they had him in like quarterback gear, like no gloves. You had the play sheet on one hand. You're like, y'all know Micah Gilbert's not a quarterback, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you have him a receiver. Why is he wearing quarterback gear?
Oh,
Jadarian Price looked like Ricky Williams.
Yeah.
Like big old stout guy with dreads. I'm like, nope. But for the most part, they were good. They were fine.
Yeah. It's a good time of year, man.
Yeah, it is. It's
a really good time of year.
It is. Yep.
Well,
it is. Well, Trev, that's going to do it, man. Why don't you take us out of here?
Yeah, you got it. Well, hey, really, really fun show today, guys. We're going to have more off-season content coming your way. Bryan and I will be back tomorrow at 1 p.m. for the buy-sell hold. I'm sure Salty already has the thread up on the message boards.
Yep, it is.
IB Nation Sports Talk goes live tonight, I believe, at 5 p.m. So hop on over and give the guys a listen to. But before you head out of here today, please be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast with your friends and family. Anybody that you know loves Notre Dame and college football as much as you do. Whatever streaming platform you listen to us on, we'd greatly appreciate a 5-star review. But
even if they're not Notre Dame fans, we got a Miami fan in the chat who we didn't ban. Archer's always been here. We used to have our guy, what was his name? Antoine. It was a Michigan fan. We used to have a Bama fan in here. As long as you don't come in here acting a fool, we love people from all different fan bases. We like people that like to actually have rational football conversations. Doesn't mean you have to agree with us, but you have to at least make a good argument. And so even if it's not a Notre Dame fan, have them check it out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The best way to support what we do here, you see it scrolling down there at the bottom of the screen. Subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.com. irishbreakdown.com. So from the podcast where it just means more, that's Bryan. I'm Trevor. We'll see you back here very soon on the Irish Breakdown podcast.